When Lena Park walked into Dominic Vale's office on her first day, she had no idea that refusing to change her outfit would change her life forever. The man who controlled half the city's power stood before her, demanding compliance with a dress code she hadn't known existed. Most people trembled before Dominic Vale. Lena met his eyes and said no. That single word sparked something dangerous, a clash of wills that would pull her into a world where loyalty meant survival, where love became the ultimate weapon, and where two people would either destroy each other or build an empire together. If you want to see how this story unfolds, stay until the end. And please hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The elevator doors opened onto the 42nd floor of Vale Tower with a whisper of engineered precision, and Lena Park stepped into a world that existed somewhere between legitimate business and something far more dangerous. The reception area stretched before her like a study in controlled intimidation. Marble floors polished to mirrors, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the city that looked less like a vista and more like a kingdom, and silence so complete it felt like a living thing. She'd researched Dominic Vale before accepting the position. Executive assistant to one of the most powerful men in the city, a salary that had made her breath catch. Benefits that seemed almost too generous. The official records painted him as a venture capitalist with interests in real estate, technology, and private equity. The unofficial whispers, the ones she'd heard in coffee shops and read between the lines of news articles, suggested something else entirely. Lena had chosen to take the job anyway. Student loans didn't care about moral ambiguity, and her mother's medical bills certainly didn't. Ms. Park, a woman materialized from behind a curved desk, her expression professionally neutral. "Mr. Vale is expecting you. Follow me, please." The walk through the executive suite felt like passing through layers of security she couldn't quite see. Cameras tracked their movement with red light precision. Doors required keycards and biometric scans. Men in expensive suits that didn't quite hide their military bearing nodded as they passed, their eyes assessing her with the kind of attention that made her spine straighten instinctively. They stopped before double doors of dark wood that probably cost more than her entire college education. "One thing," the woman said, her voice dropping slightly. "Mr. Vale has very specific expectations. About everything." Her gaze flickered over Lena's outfit, a tailored black pantsuit she'd spent 2 months' rent on, crisp white blouse, conservative heels. "You'll learn quickly, or you won't last." Before Lena could respond, the doors opened from within. The office beyond was less a workspace and more a statement of absolute control. Minimalist furniture that cost a fortune to look so simple. Art on the walls that she recognized from auction catalogs. And behind a desk of glass and steel, backlit by the city he seemed to own, sat Dominic Vale. He was younger than she'd expected, mid-30s perhaps, and nothing about him suggested the ruthless power broker she'd read about. His suit was impeccable, charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes, perfectly tailored to broad shoulders, and a frame that spoke of disciplined physical training. Dark hair, styled with casual precision. Features that would have been handsome in a conventional sense, if not for his eyes, gray as winter storms, and just as unforgiving. Those eyes tracked her entrance with an intensity that made her feel simultaneously exposed and evaluated. "Ms. Park." His voice matched everything else about him, controlled, precise, with an undercurrent of something that made smart people nervous. "You're 2 minutes early. I appreciate punctuality." "Mr. Vale." Lena moved forward, refusing to let the weight of his attention slow her stride. "Thank you for the opportunity. We'll see if gratitude is warranted." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit." It wasn't quite a command, but it wasn't a request either. Lena sat, keeping her posture straight, her hands folded in her lap. She'd practiced projecting confidence for this meeting, had rehearsed answers to potential questions, had prepared herself for the kind of interview that would determine whether she could handle working for a man like Dominic Vale. She hadn't prepared for him to simply study her in silence for what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds. "Your resume is impressive," he finally said. "Top of your class at Northwestern, internships at 3 major firms, references that border on glowing." He paused. "Why do you want to work for me?" The honest answer, "Because you pay twice what anyone else offered and I'm drowning in debt," would have been professional suicide. The diplomatic answer would have involved words like opportunity and growth and learning from the best. Lena chose something in between. Because you build empires while other people build businesses. I want to understand how that works. Something flickered in those gray eyes. Amusement, perhaps. Or appreciation. Empires require absolute loyalty, Ms. Park. They require people who understand that there are rules beneath the rules, systems within systems. Are you prepared for that? I follow the rules I agree to follow, she said carefully, as long as they're clear. Fair enough. Dominic leaned back in his chair, a movement that seemed casual but felt calculated. Then let me be clear about my first expectation. There's a dress code in this office. Professional attire, yes, but specific. Skirts or dresses, minimum 3-inch heels, hair down and styled, no pantsuits. The words landed like a physical blow. Lena felt her spine stiffen, felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with embarrassment and everything to do with anger carefully controlled. I'm sorry? Her voice came out level despite the fury building in her chest. It's not a complicated requirement, Ms. Park. Image matters in this business. Everyone who works directly for me presents a certain aesthetic. An aesthetic. Lena let the words hang there, let them reveal exactly what she thought of them. Mr. Vale, with all due respect, my clothing choices have no bearing on my ability to manage your schedule, coordinate your meetings, or handle confidential information with discretion. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air between them. With all due respect, Ms. Park, I didn't ask for your opinion on the relevance of my expectations. I stated them. And I'm declining to meet them. The silence that followed felt dangerous. Through the glass walls of his office, Lena could see other employees moving through their routines, oblivious to the confrontation unfolding in the center of the empire. She wondered if anyone had ever said no to Dominic Vale in his own territory before. You understand, he said, his voice taking on an edge that probably made hardened criminals reconsider their life choices. That most people would do considerably more than change their wardrobe for the salary I'm offering. I'm sure they would, Lena agreed, but I'm not most people. I dressed professionally. I dressed appropriately. If that's not sufficient, then perhaps this position isn't the right fit after all. She started to rise from her chair, her heart hammering against her ribs. Pride was expensive, but some things cost more than money. Sit down, Ms. Park. It was absolutely a command this time, delivered with the kind of authority that expected immediate compliance. Lena remained standing, meeting his gaze directly. I don't take orders about my body or my appearance from anyone, she said quietly. Not for any amount of money. If that's a problem, I'll show myself out. For a long moment, Dominic simply looked at her. Then, unexpectedly, one corner of his mouth lifted in what might have been a smile if it had reached his eyes. Interesting, he murmured. He stood as well, moving around his desk with a predator's grace. Up close, he was taller than she'd realized, and there was something about his presence that made the spacious office feel suddenly smaller. Most people who walk through that door are performing, Ms. Park, playing whatever role they think I want to see. Obedience, ambition, fear dressed up as respect. But you, he stopped a few feet away, close enough that she could see flecks of darker gray in his eyes. You actually meant what you just said. Every word, Lena confirmed, refusing to step back even though every instinct screamed at her to put distance between them. Why? The question came out genuinely curious. Why take a stand over something so relatively minor? You could have agreed, kept the job, and chosen your battles more strategically. Because minor things establish patterns, Mr. Vale. You wanted to see if I'd compromise my boundaries before I even started working here. If I'd agreed to this, what would you ask me to compromise next? The not-quite smile deepened. You think I was testing you? I think men like you test everyone constantly. It's how you maintain control. Men like me. He repeated the words like he was tasting them. And what kind of man do you think I am, Ms. Park? Lena chose her words carefully, aware that she was navigating a conversation that could end her career before it started, or possibly something worse given the whispers about Dominic Vale's real business. I think you're the kind of man who's built something impressive and dangerous. I think you're used to people either fearing you or wanting something from you. And I think you just discovered that I'm neither afraid enough nor desperate enough to pretend to be someone I'm not." The silence stretched between them, loaded with tension that felt almost electric. Then Dominic did something completely unexpected. He laughed, a genuine sound of surprised amusement that transformed his entire face for a moment, making him look younger and considerably more human. "You're right," he said, returning to his desk and settling back into his chair. "It was a test, and you're the first person who's passed it in exactly this way." He gestured to the chair again. "Sit down, Ms. Park, please." The addition of that last word felt significant. Lena sat, her mind racing to recalibrate the entire interaction. "I don't actually care what you wear," Dominic continued, his tone shifting to something more businesslike but less cold. "Within reason, of course. Professional standards apply, but your pantsuit is perfectly acceptable. What I care about is whether you have the spine to stand up for yourself when pressured. Because this job, the real job, requires someone who can hold their ground when powerful people try to push them around." "The real job," Lena repeated carefully. "The job I'm actually hiring you for, yes." Dominic pulled a folder from his desk drawer, sliding it across the polished surface toward her. "Executive assistant is your official title, and you'll perform those duties. But what I actually need is someone who can move through different worlds without losing themselves. Someone who can attend a charity gala one night and a negotiation in a warehouse the next. Someone smart enough to understand context and strong enough not to break under pressure." Lena opened the folder. Inside was a contract, different from the one she'd signed remotely, more detailed, with clauses about confidentiality that used words like binding arbitration and criminal prosecution. There were also numbers, very large numbers. "This is 3 times what we discussed," she said, her voice steady despite her shock. "That's the salary for the real job," Dominic said. "The one where you'll see things that would horrify most people, where you'll be privy to information that could put you in danger, where loyalty isn't just expected, it's required for your survival and mine." He leaned forward, his expression serious now, every trace of amusement gone. "I'm going to be very clear with you, Ms. Park, because you've earned that clarity. My business operates in spaces where the law is more of a suggestion than a rule. I have interests that are entirely legitimate, and I have interests that are decidedly not. The people I work with include CEOs and politicians, and also people who solve problems in ways that never make it to court." Lena's mouth went dry. Here it was, confirmation of everything the whispers had suggested. She should stand up, walk out, maybe call the police or the FBI or whoever handled this kind of thing. She should run as far and as fast as possible from Dominic Vale and his empire built on moral ambiguity. Instead, she heard herself ask, "Why are you telling me this before I've even signed anything?" "Because I need to know if you can handle the truth before I invest time training you. And because—" He paused, studying her with those storm-gray eyes. "Because something tells me you already knew, or suspected, and you came here anyway." He wasn't wrong. Lena had done her research, had read between the lines, had made her choice with her eyes at least partially open. Student loans, medical bills, a mother who deserved better than the grinding poverty that had defined Lena's childhood. These were reasons, if not quite justifications. "If I sign this," she said slowly, "what exactly am I agreeing to?" "Discretion, first and foremost. Nothing you see or hear leaves this building unless I explicitly authorize it. Availability. This isn't a 9-to-5 position. Intelligence, I need you to think 3 steps ahead, anticipate problems, solve issues before they become crises. And boundaries." He said that last word with particular emphasis. "You'll need to be very clear about what you will and won't do, because I will push you, Ms. Park. I will ask things of you that test your limits. And I need to know that when you reach those limits, you'll tell me, just like you did today. And if I refuse something you ask, then we discuss it. I'm not looking for blind obedience. I have plenty of people who'll do whatever I say without question. They're useful, but they're limited. I need someone who can think independently, who can tell me when I'm wrong, who can operate with minimal supervision in situations where I can't be present." He tilted his head slightly. "Someone who can say no to me when it matters, but also someone who knows when to say yes. Lena looked down at the contract, at the salary that would change her life, at the clauses that would bind her to a man she'd known for less than an hour. Every rational part of her brain screamed that this was a mistake, that she should walk away, that money wasn't worth compromising her principles or potentially her freedom. But there was another voice, quieter but persistent, that whispered about possibilities, about the chance to be more than another struggling graduate drowning in debt, about the opportunity to learn how real power worked, to understand the systems that shape the world from shadows, about proving, to herself as much as anyone, that she was strong enough, smart enough, capable enough to swim in waters that would drown weaker people. "I have conditions," she said finally. Dominic's eyebrows rose slightly. "Of course you do. I want it in writing that I won't be asked to do anything illegal that could result in criminal charges against me personally. I'll maintain confidentiality, I'll work in gray areas, but I won't risk prison." "Reasonable. What else?" "I want the right to refuse any task that violates my personal ethics, with the understanding that I'll provide alternative solutions where possible." "Also reasonable. Continue." "And I want regular evaluations. Not of my performance. I know I'll excel at that. Of the arrangement itself. Check-ins where we both assess whether this is working, whether the boundaries are holding, whether we trust each other enough to continue." Dominic was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. Then he pulled out a pen, made several notations on the contract, and slid it back to her. "Those amendments are acceptable. Anything else?" Lena scanned the additions, her heart racing. He'd actually agreed, just like that. "One more thing. I want to know what happened to my predecessor, your last assistant. The file said she left for personal reasons, but there's no contact information, no forwarding address, nothing." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "That's a complicated question, Ms. Park." "Then give me a complicated answer. If I'm walking into danger, I need to know what kind." For the first time since she'd entered his office, Dominic Vale looked uncomfortable. It was subtle, a slight tension in his shoulders, a momentary break in eye contact, but it was there. "My last assistant was talented," he said finally. "Also ambitious, also willing to bend rules that should have stayed firm. She saw an opportunity to profit from information she had access to, and she took it. Sold details about my business operations to a competitor." "What happened to her?" "She's alive and living very comfortably in another country, with the understanding that if she ever returns or speaks about what she knows, that situation will change dramatically." His gaze locked onto Lena's. "I don't tolerate betrayal, Ms. Park, but I also don't punish mistakes, and I don't ask for perfection. I ask for loyalty, honesty, and the courage to tell me difficult truths. Can you give me those things?" It was the fundamental question beneath all the others. Could she work for a man who operated outside the law? Could she maintain her integrity while facilitating an empire built on a moral compromise? Could she be loyal to someone dangerous without losing herself in the process? "I can give you honesty," Lena said carefully. "I can give you my best work. I can give you discretion and intelligence and the willingness to learn how your world works. As for loyalty, that's something you'll have to earn, Mr. Vale, just like I'll have to earn yours." The smile that crossed his face this time was genuine, reaching his eyes and transforming his expression from intimidating to almost warm. "Fair enough, Ms. Park. Fair enough." He extended his hand across the desk. Lena looked at it for a moment. This hand that had built empires, that had made deals and broken enemies, that was offering her a chance to step into a world she barely understood. She took it. His grip was firm but not crushing, his palm warm against hers. The handshake lasted perhaps 3 seconds. But in those seconds, Lena felt the trajectory of her life shift irrevocably. "Welcome to the team," Dominic said. "We start immediately. Anna, the woman who brought you in, will get you set up with keys, access codes, technology. Your office is adjacent to mine. I expect you here by 7 tomorrow morning. We have a meeting at 8:30 that you'll need to prepare for." "What kind of meeting?" "The kind where you'll learn very quickly whether you made the right choice." He turned back to his computer, then paused. "Oh, and Ms. Park? That thing you did today, standing your ground when I pushed you? Don't lose that. Most people in my world have forgotten how to do it. It's going to make you either invaluable or impossible. Possibly both. Lena stood, tucking the signed contract into her bag. Which would you prefer, Mr. Vale? Ask me again in 6 months, he said without looking up. If you last that long. It should have sounded like a threat. Instead, it felt like a challenge. The rest of that first day passed in a blur of information that felt designed to overwhelm. Anna, whose title was apparently Director of Operations, which seemed to mean she ran everything Dominic didn't directly control, walked Lena through systems so complex they probably required security clearance to fully understand. There were 3 separate calendar systems. One for public appointments that anyone in the office could see, one for private meetings that required her personal code to access, and one that Anna showed her with the warning that this is where the real business happens, and you don't discuss these appointments with anyone except Mr. Vale. The real business calendar was alarmingly sparse on details. DM, Pier 17, 11 p.m., told her nothing and everything simultaneously. You'll learn the abbreviations, Anna said, her tone brisk but not unkind. DM is Dennis Moretti. He runs shipping operations on the east side. Pier 17 is neutral territory. No one gets hurt there. It's part of an old agreement. The time tells you it's sensitive. Mr. Vale doesn't do legitimate business at 11 at night. Should I be taking notes? Lena asked, only half joking. No notes, nothing written down. You'll develop a memory for this, or you won't last. Anna pulled up another screen. These are Mr. Vale's current interests. Real estate development in 3 districts, technology investments through a venture capital fund, private equity positions in 6 companies, and a foundation that funds after-school programs in underserved communities. The foundation is real? Anna gave her a sharp look. Everything Mr. Vale does is real, Mrs. Park. The foundation actually helps thousands of kids every year. The fact that it also provides excellent tax benefits and community goodwill doesn't make the help any less genuine. You'll learn that things can be complicated without being fake. It was a fair point, and one that Lena filed away as the first of many lessons about the world she'd entered. Her office turned out to be a glass-walled space that shared a wall with Dominic's larger domain. She could see him through the transparent barrier, working with the kind of focused intensity that made it clear why he'd built an empire. He never seemed to stop moving. Phone calls, typing, meetings with men in expensive suits who all had the same predatory energy. Around 6, Anna reappeared. You should go home. Get rest. Tomorrow will be intense. What's the meeting? Lena asked. The 8:30? Negotiation with a property owner who doesn't want to sell. Mr. Vale wants the building, and he usually gets what he wants. You'll observe, take mental notes, and learn how these things work. And if the owner still won't sell? Anna's smile was thin. Then you'll learn what happens when people stand between Mr. Vale and his objectives. It's not always pretty, but it's always effective. Lena left Vale Tower as the sun set behind the city skyline, painting the glass and steel in shades of gold and crimson that looked beautiful and vaguely apocalyptic. Her phone buzzed, a text from her mother asking how the first day went. Good, Lena typed back. I think I'm going to learn a lot. That was certainly true, even if the lessons were nothing like what her mother imagined. The train ride home gave her time to process. She'd signed a contract with a man who'd admitted to operating outside the law. She'd accepted a salary built on businesses that existed in moral gray areas at best. She'd chosen money and opportunity over safety and certainty. And the terrifying part, the part that kept her awake that night in her tiny apartment staring at the ceiling, was that she didn't regret it. There was something intoxicating about Dominic Vale. Not attraction exactly, though he was objectively handsome in that controlled, dangerous way, but power. The certainty with which he moved through the world, the way he bent reality to his will, the empire he'd built through intelligence and ruthlessness, and some combination of legal and illegal means. Lena had spent her whole life following rules, playing it safe, doing everything right. And where had it gotten her? Buried in debt, watching her mother slowly deteriorate in a care facility they could barely afford, working 3 jobs just to stay afloat. Maybe it was time to stop following rules and start learning how the people who made the rules actually operated. She arrived at Vale Tower at 6:45 the next morning, wanting to be early but not absurdly so. The building had a different energy before business hours, quieter, more dangerous somehow. Security was heavier, men with obvious weapons checking IDs with extra scrutiny. Her new keycard worked on the elevator. Her codes opened her office. And through the glass wall, she could see Dominic already at his desk, looking like he'd been there for hours. He glanced up when she entered, nodding acknowledgement. "Coffee's in the break room. Help yourself. We have 40 minutes before they arrive." Lena found the break room, which was less a room and more a luxury kitchen, and poured herself a cup from a machine that probably cost more than her car. When she returned, Dominic was standing at his window, hands in his pockets, staring out at the city. "Nervous?" he asked without turning around. "Should I be?" "Probably." The Costellos aren't people who respond well to pressure, and Eduardo Costello particularly dislikes being told no. Now he did turn, his expression serious. He owns a building in the warehouse district. Prime location, perfect for development. I've made him 3 increasingly generous offers. He's refused all of them. Why? Because it's not about money for him. It's about pride, territory, and the fact that his family has operated in that district for 3 generations. Selling to me would be seen as surrender. And you need the property anyway. I do. The development doesn't work without it. So today, we make him an offer he'll understand, even if he doesn't accept it immediately. Before Lena could ask what that meant, Anna appeared at the door. "They're here. Eduardo Costello and his daughter, Elena, conference room 2. Something flickered across Dominic's face when Anna said Elena's name. Something that looked almost like regret, quickly suppressed. "You knew her," Lena said. It wasn't a question. "Long time ago. Different life." He straightened his cuffs, his expression smoothing into perfect neutrality. "Come, watch, learn. Don't speak unless I ask you a direct question." The conference room was smaller than Lena expected, with a table that seated 8 and windows that had been polarized to prevent anyone from seeing in or out. Already seated were 2 people who radiated the kind of confidence that came from old money and older power. Eduardo Costello was in his 60s, silver-haired and impeccably dressed in a style that spoke of European tailoring and family tradition. His face was lined but handsome, his eyes sharp with intelligence that age hadn't diminished. But it was his daughter who commanded attention. Elena Costello was perhaps 30, dark-haired and beautiful in a way that seemed weaponized. She wore a black dress that was perfectly professional and somehow still suggested danger, her posture radiating coiled energy. When her eyes met Dominic's, the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "Dominic," she said, her voice carrying layers of meaning Lena couldn't quite parse. "Elena." He moved to the head of the table, Lena following to stand slightly behind him. "Thank you both for coming. I appreciate your time." "Your assistant was quite insistent," Eduardo said, his accent carrying a trace of Italian that generations in America hadn't quite erased. "Though I told her, as I've told you, that my answer hasn't changed." "I'm hoping to change your mind," Dominic said smoothly. "I've prepared a new proposal, one I think addresses your concerns about legacy and family." He slid a folder across the table. Eduardo opened it, scanning the contents with his daughter, looking over his shoulder. Lena watched Elena's expression shift from neutral to surprised to something harder to read. "You want to name the development after my grandfather," Eduardo said slowly. "The Costello Center," Dominic confirmed. "Mixed-use development, luxury apartments, retail space, and critically, a community center offering job training and small business loans specifically for families from the neighborhood. Your family's name on something that actually helps the community they've been part of for generations." It was, Lena had to admit, a brilliant move, acknowledging the family's legacy while offering something that transcended simple commerce. "And you think this changes the fundamental issue?" Elena asked, her voice sharp. "You're still trying to push us out of territory we've held for 70 years. You're still trying to expand your empire at our expense." "I'm offering partnership," Dominic corrected. "Your father retains 20% ownership. The Costello name is preserved, and the community benefits in ways that go far beyond whatever your family's operations currently provide." The barb was subtle but clear. Whatever the Costellos did in that district, it wasn't community uplift. Eduardo's expression hardened. "You presume to lecture me about my responsibilities?" "I presume to offer you a choice," Dominic said, and now Lena heard steel beneath the diplomatic words. Take the partnership. Let your family's name stand for something that builds instead of something that extracts. Or what? Elena leaned forward. What happens if we refuse, Dominic? What pressure do you apply next? What threats do you make? The silence that followed felt combustible. Lena held her breath, suddenly acutely aware that she was watching something far more complex than a simple business negotiation. I don't make threats, Elena. You know that. Dominic's voice was quiet, almost gentle, which somehow made it more dangerous. I present realities. And the reality is that this development will happen. With your cooperation, it becomes something you can be proud of. Without it, he paused. Without it, other pressures will mount. Inspections will find violations in your properties. Permits will face delays. Business partners will discover better opportunities elsewhere. It won't be quick, and it won't be obvious. But slowly, inevitably, your position will erode until selling becomes not a choice, but a necessity. And at that point, the terms won't be nearly as favorable. So you are threatening us, Eduardo said coldly. I'm explaining how the world works, Dominic countered. You've operated in these spaces long enough to know that everything is connected. I'd prefer partnership. I'd prefer your family benefits from this. But I will have that property, Mr. Costello. The only question is whether you make this easy or hard. Elena stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. My father needs time to consider your generous offer, she said, her tone making it clear exactly what she thought of its generosity. We'll have our answer within a week. 3 days, Dominic said. After that, the terms change. Father and daughter left without another word, the door closing behind them with quiet finality. Lena waited until their footsteps had faded before speaking. That was, necessary, Dominic finished. And about as well as I expected. Eduardo will dig in out of pride. Elena will counsel him to fight, and in 72 hours, they'll accept because they're smart enough to recognize when they're outmaneuvered. The daughter hates you. The daughter has reasons to hate me. He gathered the folder Eduardo had left behind. We were involved years ago, before I built all this, before I became who I am now. It ended badly. Because you chose power over her? Dominic looked at Lena with something like surprise. Because I couldn't be the man she needed me to be. There's a difference. He left the conference room, and Lena followed, her mind churning with questions she didn't quite know how to ask. About Elena. About the history between them. About what it cost to build an empire, and whether Dominic Vale had any regrets about the price. The rest of the day passed in controlled chaos. Calls, meetings, documents that required her review and filing in systems so complex she'd need months to fully understand them. But through it all, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that the meeting with the Costellos had set something in motion. Something that went beyond business negotiations and into territory far more personal and far more dangerous. At 7 that evening, as she was preparing to leave, Dominic appeared in her doorway. Good first full day, he said. You handled yourself well in there, stayed quiet, observed, didn't let Elena's hostility throw you. She was testing me, Lena said, seeing if I'd react. Yes, and you didn't. That's valuable. He paused. There's a function tomorrow night. Charity gala. Entirely legitimate, but attended by people from every part of my world. I need you there. As your assistant? As my companion. This is part of what I hired you for, the ability to move between worlds. You'll meet people tomorrow night who range from senators to criminals, often in the same conversation. Can you handle that? Lena thought about all the reasons she should say no, about how every step deeper into Dominic Vale's world was a step further from the safe, rule-following life she'd planned. What's the dress code? She asked instead. His smile was slight but genuine. Formal. And before you worry, wear whatever you want. I meant what I said yesterday. Your choices, your boundaries. Then, yes, I can handle it. Good. He turned to leave, then paused. Lena? It was the first time he'd used her first name. It felt significant. Yes? The Costellos are dangerous, not in the way I'm dangerous. Controlled, calculated, they're passionate, unpredictable, and they hold grudges that span generations. What happened in that room today? That was the opening move in a game that could get very ugly very fast. I need you to understand that before tomorrow. I understand, Lena said, even though she wasn't entirely sure she did. But she was learning. And in Dominic Vale's world, that might be the most dangerous thing of all. The dress Lena chose for the gala was midnight blue silk that caught the light when she moved, elegant without being ostentatious, expensive enough to belong but not so extravagant that it would draw unwanted attention. She'd spent more than she should have, but Dominic's first paycheck had cleared that morning, and some investments were strategic. He picked her up at 7 in a car that whispered wealth, not a limousine, which would have been too obvious, but a sleek black sedan with a driver who knew better than to make small talk. Dominic himself wore a tuxedo with the same casual perfection he brought to everything else, looking every inch the legitimate businessman rather than the power broker who operated in shadows. "You look nervous," he observed as the car slid through traffic. "I am nervous," Lena admitted. "You said this event would have everyone from senators to criminals. I'm not sure which makes me more anxious." "Often they're the same people." His mouth quirked slightly. "The key is remembering that everyone there is performing. The senator pretends his campaign contributions don't influence his votes. The CEO pretends her company's offshore accounts are entirely legal. And I pretend I'm just another venture capitalist with a social conscience." He glanced at her. "What will you pretend? That I know what I'm doing?" "No, you'll pretend nothing. That's your advantage tonight, Lena. You're new, you're unknown, and people will underestimate you. Watch, listen, remember. Some of the most valuable intelligence I've ever gathered came from people who thought my assistant wasn't worth noticing." The Meridian Hotel rose before them like a monument to excess, all Art Deco glamour and modern luxury. The ballroom was even more impressive, vaulted ceilings, chandeliers that probably required structural engineering to install, and a crowd that represented more combined wealth and power than most countries possessed. Dominic's hand settled at the small of her back as they entered, a gesture that looked protective but felt like staking claim. Lena forced herself not to stiffen at the contact. This was part of the performance, the image they were projecting. Executive assistant was one thing. Companion at a social event suggested something else entirely, even if that something was entirely fabricated. "Mr. Vale!" A man in his 50s materialized from the crowd, hand extended, smile bright with the particular intensity of someone who wanted something. "Wonderful to see you. I was hoping we'd have a chance to chat about that development proposal." "Senator Morrison." Dominic's handshake was brief, professional. "I didn't realize you'd be here tonight. This is Lena Park, my executive assistant." The senator's gaze flickered over Lena with the kind of assessment that made her skin crawl. "Pleasure. Your predecessor was quite competent. I'm sure you'll live up to Dominic's exacting standards." There was something pointed in the way he said it, some subtext Lena didn't quite catch. She smiled politely, saying nothing, and watched Dominic's expression remain perfectly neutral even as something cold entered his eyes. "I'm sure she will," Dominic said. "Though I should mention that the development proposal you're referring to is still under review. My team has concerns about the environmental impact assessments." "Concerns that might be addressed with the right incentives?" The senator's tone was jovial, but his meaning was crystal clear. "Concerns that will be addressed when the data supports moving forward," Dominic corrected. "I'm not in the habit of cutting corners, Senator, even when those corners are offered to me." The temperature between them dropped noticeably. Senator Morrison's smile tightened. "Of course. Well, I'll let you enjoy the evening, Ms. Park." He nodded and melted back into the crowd. "He wanted you to bribe him," Lena said quietly once they were alone. "He wanted me to confirm that I'd already bribed him, actually. The development he mentioned goes through on its merits or not at all. Morrison assumed because I operate in gray areas, I operate in all gray areas. It's a common mistake. So you do have principles about what you won't do." "I have strategic principles about what creates too much risk," Dominic corrected. "Bribing elected officials is messy, creates paper trails, and gives them leverage over you. Much cleaner to make campaign contributions, host fundraisers, and let them reach their own conclusions about how they should vote." Before Lena could respond, a woman's voice cut through the ambient conversation like a blade. "How touching." Dominic Vale refusing a bribe. I suppose even you have lines you won't cross. Elena Costello stood 3 feet away, devastating in a red gown that was probably chosen specifically to command attention. Her dark hair was pulled back severely, emphasizing bone structure that belonged on magazine covers, and her eyes held the kind of fury that burned cold rather than hot. Elena, Dominic's voice was carefully neutral. I didn't know you'd be attending. My father is on the board of the Children's Literacy Foundation this event benefits. Unlike you, we actually care about the causes we support rather than using them as networking opportunities. That's unfair, Lena heard herself say before she could stop herself. Both of them turned to look at her. Dominic with surprise, Elena with something like amusement mixed with contempt. I'm sorry? Elena's tone suggested Lena had just made a serious tactical error. But Lena had already committed, and backing down would be worse than pressing forward. I've spent the last week reviewing Mr. Vale's foundation work. The after-school programs alone serve 3,000 kids. The job training initiative has a 70% placement rate. Whatever else he does, the charitable work is real and effective. How sweet. You've drunk the Kool-Aid already. Elena stepped closer, her gaze never leaving Lena's face. Let me guess, you think you're different from the others, that you'll be the one who understands him, who sees past the ruthless exterior to the man underneath, that your loyalty will be rewarded. I think I'm paid to do a job, Lena said evenly, and I do it well. Until you become inconvenient, until you see too much or question too loudly, or simply stop being useful. Elena's smile was sharp as broken glass. Ask yourself, Ms. Park, what happened to the woman who had your job before you? Where is she now? Did Dominic tell you? He did, actually, Lena said, keeping her voice steady despite the way her pulse hammered. She betrayed his trust, and he sent her away. He was honest about it. Honest, Elena laughed, the sound bitter. Dominic Vale doesn't know the meaning of the word. He tells you what you need to hear to keep you compliant, to keep you useful, and when you stop being either of those things, that's enough, Elena. Dominic's voice cut across hers, sharp with authority. Whatever issues you and I have, Lena isn't part of them. Leave her out of this. She became part of this the moment she accepted your job offer, but Elena stepped back, her attention shifting fully to Dominic now. My father is considering your proposal. I think it's a mistake. I think you're trying to push us out of our territory with pretty words and false promises. And I think eventually we're going to have to push back. Your father is a smart man, Dominic said. He knows when to fight and when to make strategic alliances. I'm hoping he'll choose wisely. Are you threatening my family? I'm stating facts. The development moves forward with or without Costello cooperation. Better for everyone if it's with. They stared at each other for a long moment, the air between them crackling with history and hostility Lena didn't fully understand. Then Elena turned on her heel and walked away, the crowd parting before her like she commanded it to. I'm sorry, Lena said once they were alone again. I shouldn't have engaged with her. Don't apologize. You defended me. That took courage, even if it was strategically questionable. Dominic's expression was unreadable. But she's right about one thing. You are involved now. Elena doesn't make idle threats, and she doesn't forget perceived slights. By speaking up, you just made yourself visible to the Costello family. Is that a problem? It might be. He guided her toward the bar with that hand at her back again. Elena operates differently than I do. I prefer pressure applied slowly, systematically. She's more direct. If she decides you're an obstacle or a tool to use against me, she won't hesitate. A chill ran down Lena's spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. What does that mean practically? It means you need to be aware of your surroundings. It means you don't go places alone that you wouldn't go anyway. It means you tell me if anyone approaches you claiming to be from the Costello family or asking questions about my business. He caught the bartender's attention, ordering wine for both of them. And it means you need to decide right now whether you're still sure about this job, because there's a difference between understanding intellectually that my world is dangerous and experiencing that danger personally. Lena accepted the wine glass he handed her, using the moment to gather her thoughts. Everything Elena had said was true in its way. Lena had romanticized this to some degree, Imagined that she could navigate Dominic's empire without truly being part of it. But standing here, having just made an enemy of a woman who clearly operated by different rules than Lena understood, reality settled over her like weight. "I'm sure," she said finally. "I knew what I was signing up for, and if defending you put me on Elena's radar, then that's the price of the position." Something shifted in Dominic's expression. Respect, maybe. Or the beginning of trust. "All right, then let's work the room. There are people here you need to meet." The next 2 hours were a crash course in the hidden architecture of power. Dominic introduced her to judges who smiled warmly while discussing legal precedents that could be interpreted flexibly, to business owners who congratulated him on recent acquisitions that hadn't been announced publicly yet, to men who looked like accountants but whose eyes held the particular hardness of people who'd done violence personally rather than by proxy. And through it all, Lena watched and learned. She saw how Dominic shifted his approach for each conversation, deferential with the older generation of power brokers, collegial with peers, subtly dominant with those who came to him seeking favors. She noticed who approached him and who he sought out, the difference between genuine allies and people kept close for strategic reasons. "You're a quick study," observed a woman who introduced herself as Patricia Chen, owner of a shipping company that Lena suspected moved more than just legal cargo. "Most people Dominic brings to these things spend the whole night overwhelmed. You're taking notes." "Mental ones," Lena confirmed. "Smart. Paper trails are dangerous in this world." Patricia sipped her champagne, studying Lena with eyes that missed nothing. "Word of advice, since you seem like you might actually last. Don't trust anyone here completely. Not even Dominic, especially not Dominic. He's brilliant and he'll protect you as long as you're useful. But the moment that calculation changes, so does everything else." "You sound like you're speaking from experience." "I am. I used to work for him years ago before I built my own operation. He taught me everything I know about how this world really works. And the most important lesson was this: loyalty flows upward until it doesn't. The moment you become more valuable to his enemies than to him, everything changes." Before Lena could respond, Dominic materialized at her elbow. "Patricia, still trying to poach my people?" "Just offering wisdom earned through experience, Dominic. You should thank me." "I'll take it under advisement." His tone was light, but something passed between them, some understanding or old conflict Lena couldn't quite read. "We need to make the rounds. The mayor just arrived, and I have questions about permitting timelines." The mayor turned out to be a jovial man who spoke enthusiastically about urban development while his eyes calculated how much he could extract from every conversation. He and Dominic discussed zoning regulations like old friends, though Lena noticed money never changed hands, just agreements, favors promised, debts acknowledged. By 10 o'clock, Lena's feet ached from her heels, and her head spun from trying to track all the names, connections, and subtle threats disguised as pleasantries. When Dominic finally guided her toward the exit, she felt simultaneously exhausted and electrified. The car was waiting, and once they were safely inside with the driver pulling into traffic, Dominic loosened his bow tie with visible relief. "You did well tonight," he said. "Better than well, actually. You picked up on conversational undercurrents faster than I expected, and you managed to stay professional even when Elena tried to rattle you." "She succeeded in rattling me," Lena admitted. "I'm just good at hiding it." "Even better. Appearing unshakable is more important than actually being unshakable." He glanced at her in the dim light of the passing streetlights. "Patricia's right, you know, about not trusting anyone completely, including me." "Is this where you tell me all the ways you might betray me?" "This is where I tell you that trust in my world is transactional. I'll protect you, support you, and value your work as long as our interests align. But if a situation arose where sacrificing you served a larger strategic purpose, I would make that calculation. It's nothing personal, it's survival." The honesty was jarring. Most people would have lied, would have offered false promises of absolute loyalty. Dominic simply stated the reality of his world with the same calm he'd used to discuss weather. "Good to know," Lena said finally. "I'll operate accordingly." "Don't let it make you paranoid. Just let it make you smart. There's a difference between healthy caution and debilitating fear." The car pulled up outside her apartment building, modest compared to the luxury they'd just left, but home nonetheless. Dominic's driver came around to open her door, but before Lena could exit, Dominic spoke again. The Costellos are going to respond to my deadline tomorrow. My guess is they'll refuse. Try to call my bluff about applying pressure. When that happens, things will escalate quickly. I need you prepared for that. What does preparation look like? It looks like understanding that business negotiations in my world sometimes involve violence. Not against you. You're too valuable and too visible. But people in the Costello organization might find themselves facing suddenly hostile business environments. Shipments might go missing. Permits might be denied. Accidents might happen. Lena's stomach tightened. You're talking about sabotage. I'm talking about leverage. The Costellos understand pressure because they've applied it themselves for decades. This is their language, and I'm simply speaking it fluently. And you need me to do what exactly? I need you to document everything. Times, dates, conversations. Create a record that looks like normal business operations while actually tracking the pressure campaign. And I need you to not flinch when you see how these things actually work. It was the moment of truth, Lena realized. She could refuse, could walk away, could decide that however much money Dominic paid her wasn't worth becoming complicit in what amounted to economic warfare. She could choose safety over opportunity, could return to the struggling but morally uncomplicated life she'd known before. I'll need access to files I don't currently have, she said instead. Dominic's smile was slight but genuine. You'll have them by morning, along with a security detail. I don't need... You do now. Elena made sure of that when she confronted you tonight. You're a known entity in their world now, which means you're a potential target. The detail will be discreet, but they'll be there. Lena wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could take care of herself, but that would be stupid pride talking, and stupid pride got people hurt in worlds like this. Fine, but they stay outside my apartment. I'm not having bodyguards in my living room. Agreed. They'll maintain a perimeter, nothing intrusive. He hesitated, then added, I know this isn't what you signed up for when you imagined being an executive assistant, and I know it's asking a lot to trust me when I've just told you that trust is transactional. But for what it's worth, Lena, you're proving to be exactly what I needed. Someone smart enough to understand the game and strong enough to play it. It should have felt like manipulation, and maybe it was, but there was something genuine in his tone that made her think he actually meant it. I'll see you tomorrow, she said, climbing out of the car. Try not to start any wars before I get there to document them. His laugh followed her all the way to her building's entrance. The security detail became apparent the next morning when Lena noticed the same sedan parked across from her building that had been there when she'd left for her morning run. Professional enough not to be obvious, visible enough that anyone paying attention would know she was protected. At the office, the atmosphere was different, tighter, more focused, like everyone knew something was coming. Anna was particularly brisk in her morning briefing, rattling off appointments and priorities with the efficiency of someone preparing for battle. The Costellos are scheduled to call at 10, she said. Mr. Vale wants you in his office for it. Conference call, not video. He'll lead, you'll take notes. The call came exactly on time, Eduardo Costello's voice crackling through the speaker with barely suppressed anger. Your deadline is premature and your pressure tactics are transparent, he said without preamble. The answer is no, Mr. Vale. We will not be selling our property, and we will not be intimidated into a partnership we don't want. Dominic's expression remained perfectly neutral. I'm disappointed to hear that, Mr. Costello. I was hoping we could find a mutually beneficial arrangement. Mutually beneficial. Eduardo's laugh was harsh. You mean beneficial to you while we lose territory my grandfather fought to establish. I know how you operate, Vale. I know what happens to people who stand in your way, but the Costellos don't scare easily. I'm not trying to scare you. I'm trying to offer you a way forward that preserves your family's legacy while allowing necessary development to proceed. But if you're determined to make this difficult, then I suppose it will be difficult. Is that a threat? It's a statement of reality. I'll give you one more week to reconsider. After that, the offer changes. Significantly less favorable terms, no naming rights, no partnership structure, just a straight buyout at market rate, which I think we both know is considerably less than what I'm currently offering. And if we refuse that as well, then we'll see what happens. I'm confident you'll make the right choice eventually. The question is how much it will cost you to reach that conclusion. The line went dead. Eduardo had hung up without another word. Dominic leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, expression thoughtful. He's going to fight. Elena will push him to, and he's proud enough to listen to her, which means we move to phase 2. What's phase 2? Lena asked, though she suspected she already knew. Phase 2 is where we demonstrate that refusing my partnership comes with consequences. Nothing illegal. I'm not interested in giving them ammunition for law enforcement. But the Costellos have vulnerabilities, businesses that rely on permits and inspections, relationships with suppliers who might suddenly find better opportunities elsewhere, political allies who might remember that supporting them isn't as profitable as supporting me. He pulled out a tablet, pulling up what looked like organizational charts. This is the Costello business empire. Shipping, real estate, 3 restaurants, and a construction company. All legitimate on paper, though I suspect the shipping operation moves more than declared cargo. Here's what I need you to do. For the next hour, he walked her through a campaign of economic pressure so sophisticated it was almost beautiful in its complexity. Nothing that could be traced directly back to him, nothing that crossed into illegality, but dozens of small actions that would compound until the Costellos found themselves bleeding money and influence from 1,000 tiny cuts. It's brilliant, Lena admitted, even as part of her recoiled from the cold calculation of it. It's necessary. The Costellos respect strength. Show weakness, and they'll exploit it. Show them you're willing to fight, and eventually they'll negotiate. And if they don't? If Elena convinces her father to escalate instead? Dominic's expression hardened. Then things get more serious, but we're not there yet. For now, we apply pressure and wait. The waiting turned out to be the hardest part. Over the next 3 days, Lena watched Dominic's machine move into action. Building inspectors discovered violations in Costello properties. Shipping contracts were mysteriously terminated. The construction company found its permits delayed by bureaucratic red tape that appeared from nowhere. And through it all, Lena documented everything, creating the paper trail Dominic needed while trying not to think too hard about what she was actually doing. On the 4th day, Elena Costello appeared in the lobby of Vale Tower. Security called up immediately. Ms. Costello is here requesting to see Mr. Vale. She doesn't have an appointment. Dominic considered for a moment, then nodded to Lena. Send her up, and stay close. I want you to observe this. Elena arrived 5 minutes later, escorted by 2 security guards who looked ready to tackle her if she moved wrong. She was dressed more casually than at the gala. Jeans, leather jacket, boots, but somehow looked even more dangerous. Elena, Dominic greeted her from behind his desk. This is unexpected. Is it? She didn't sit, didn't accept the hospitality of his space. You've spent the last week systematically dismantling my family's business operations, and you think I wouldn't show up to discuss it? I offered your father a partnership. He refused. I told him there would be consequences. Consequences. Elena's laugh was sharp. You're strangling us, Dominic. Every business we operate is suddenly facing obstacles that coincidentally appeared right after we rejected your offer. You want me to believe that's not your doing? I want you to believe that refusing to work with me comes with natural market consequences. I have influence, Elena. When I withdraw my support from people, others notice and act accordingly. Support we never asked for in the first place. Support you benefited from whether you asked for it or not. The political protection, the regulatory blind eyes, the business relationships that made your operations profitable. Did you think those existed in a vacuum? Your family has been under my umbrella for years. I simply removed that umbrella. The revelation seemed to catch Elena off guard. Her expression shifted from anger to something more complex. Understanding mixed with fury. You're saying we've been paying you tribute without knowing it. I'm saying we've had an understanding that your father either didn't recognize or chose not to acknowledge, but understandings can change. I'm offering him a chance to formalize our relationship in a way that benefits both of us. Or he can continue to refuse and learn exactly how much he relied on my goodwill. Elena moved closer to the desk, her posture aggressive. And what about her? She gestured to Lena. What's her role in all this? Is she the new me? The woman you keep close until she becomes inconvenient? Lena is my assistant, nothing more, nothing less. Liar. But there was less heat in the word than there might have been. You don't keep people close without reason, Dominic. Everyone serves a purpose in your world. So what's hers? To do her job, Dominic said flatly, which doesn't include being interrogated by you. If you came here to negotiate, negotiate. If you came to threaten, make your threats and leave. But don't drag Lena into whatever issues you and I have. For a long moment, Elena stared at him, something unreadable passing across her face. Then she turned to Lena directly. He'll hurt you eventually, she said quietly. Maybe not physically, maybe not even intentionally. But everyone who gets close to Dominic Vale ends up damaged. Remember that when you're drowning in his world and wondering how you got there. She left without waiting for a response, the door closing behind her with controlled force. The silence that followed felt heavy. Lena realized her hands were shaking slightly and forced them still. She's not entirely wrong, Dominic said finally, about people getting hurt around me. It's the nature of what I do. Are you warning me or apologizing? Neither. Just being honest. He pulled up something on his computer. The Costellos will respond to this, probably within 24 hours. When they do, it won't be through official channels. Elena doesn't operate that way. What does that mean for me? It means you stay alert. It means the security detail stays close. And it means if anyone approaches you claiming to represent the Costello family, you call me immediately before engaging with them. He looked up, his gray eyes serious. Elena's right that you're involved now. I'm sorry for that. But I'll protect you, Lena. Whatever else happens, I'll make sure you're safe. It should have been reassuring. Instead, it felt like standing on the edge of something vast and dangerous, knowing that one wrong step would send her tumbling into depths she couldn't navigate alone. What happens if they don't back down? She asked. If this keeps escalating? Dominic was quiet for a long moment. Then we find out exactly how far everyone is willing to go, and hope that when the dust settles, we're all still standing. It wasn't the answer she'd wanted, but it was the one she'd expected. In Dominic Vale's world, there were no guarantees, only calculations, strategies, and the hope that you'd planned better than your opponents. Lena returned to her office and tried to focus on normal work, but Elena's words kept echoing in her mind. Everyone who gets close to Dominic Vale ends up damaged. She'd signed up for this job knowing it was dangerous, knowing it would push her boundaries. But sitting here now, caught between warring empires, she wondered if she'd truly understood what that meant. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You should get out while you can. This isn't your fight. Lena stared at the message, her pulse quickening. She showed it to Dominic, who read it with an expression that went from neutral to dangerous. That's Elena's style, he said. Direct approach. She's trying to scare you into quitting. Is it working? He looked at her sharply, and Lena realized the question revealed more than she'd intended. I don't know, she admitted. Part of me wants to run, but another part refuses to let her win. That's pride talking. Don't let pride make your decisions. What should make my decisions? Reality, facts, understanding what you're actually risking versus what you're gaining. He handed back her phone. You want my advice? Think about it tonight. Really think about whether this job is worth what it's costing you. And tomorrow, give me an honest answer about whether you're staying or going. It was more consideration than she'd expected from him, more humanity than the ruthless power broker image suggested. Lena nodded, pocketing her phone, and tried to return to work. But the question followed her home, through her evening routine, into her restless attempts at sleep. Was this worth it? The money, yes. The opportunity to see how power really worked, absolutely. But at what cost? Her safety? Her principles? Her sense of who she was? By morning, she still didn't have a clear answer. But she showed up at Vale Tower at 6:45 anyway, walked through security, took the elevator to the 42nd floor, and found Dominic already at his desk. He looked up when she entered, something like relief crossing his features. You came back, he said simply. I did. Lena set down her bag, met his gaze directly. Elena's right that this is dangerous. She's right that I'm in over my head. But she's wrong that I should run. I made a choice when I took this job, and I'm not backing out just because it got hard. Dominic stood, moving around his desk. You're sure? No, but I'm committed anyway. He extended his hand, and she took it, feeling the now familiar warmth of his grip, the strange sense that in shaking hands with Dominic Vale, she was agreeing to something far more significant than employment. "Then let's get to work," he said. "The Costellos aren't going to negotiate with themselves." The work proved to be exactly what Dominic had promised: complicated, morally ambiguous, and oddly exhilarating. Lena spent her days tracking the careful dismantling of Costello business operations, watching as Dominic's network of influence tightened around Eduardo's empire like a noose. Every permit delay, every canceled contract, every unexpected inspection was documented in meticulous detail, creating a record that looked entirely legitimate while serving a purpose that was anything but. What surprised her most was how legal it all was. Dominic never crossed lines that would give the Costellos ammunition for lawsuits or criminal complaints. He simply used the systems that already existed, applying pressure through channels so established that opposing them would require admitting to violations the Costellos themselves had committed. "It's chess," he explained one afternoon as they reviewed the week's progress. "You don't win by breaking the rules. You win by understanding them better than your opponent and using that understanding to corner them. And the Costellos are cornered. Getting there. Eduardo's construction company just lost its 3 largest contracts. The building inspectors found code violations that will cost $500,000 to repair. And the shipping operation is facing customs delays that are entirely coincidental and entirely legal." Lena studied the report spread across his desk, seeing the pattern emerge. "How long before they capitulate?" "Eduardo? Maybe 2 more weeks. He's stubborn, but he's not stupid. When the financial pain becomes unbearable, he'll negotiate." Dominic's expression darkened slightly. "Elena, though, she won't give up as easily. She sees this as personal, not just business." As if summoned by the mention of her name, Anna appeared at the door, her face tight with tension. "We have a situation. Elena Costello is downstairs with 4 men. Security won't let them up, but she's demanding to see you." Dominic's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "What kind of men?" "The kind who are carrying and not bothering to hide it. Security has already called the police, but Elena's saying if you don't come down in the next 5 minutes, she's coming up anyway." For the first time since Lena had met him, Dominic looked genuinely concerned. He stood, buttoning his jacket with quick, precise movements. "Tell security to stand down. I'll meet her in the lobby. And call my lawyer. I want him on standby." "Dominic," Lena started, but he was already moving toward the door. "Stay here," he said over his shoulder. "Lock the door after I leave. Don't open it for anyone except Anna or building security." The command was absolute, allowing no room for argument. Lena watched him disappear toward the elevators, then turned to Anna, whose expression mirrored her own apprehension. "This is bad, isn't it?" Lena asked. Lena. "Elena Costello showing up with armed men?" "Yes. This is very bad." Anna moved to Dominic's desk, pulling up security camera feeds on his computer. "But if anyone can defuse it, it's him. He and Elena have history. She won't actually hurt him." "You sound uncertain." "I am uncertain. People do stupid things when they're desperate, and we've made the Costellos very desperate." Through the security feeds, Lena watched Dominic emerge from the elevator into the lobby. Elena stood in the center of the marble space, flanked by 4 men whose body language screamed violence barely contained. They were dressed in dark suits, but these weren't businessmen. They were soldiers, and their presence transformed the corporate lobby into a battlefield. Dominic approached with his hands visible, his posture non-threatening but not submissive. He said something Lena couldn't hear through the camera, and Elena responded with visible fury, gesturing sharply. The men moved closer, and Lena's breath caught. "He's not armed," she said. "Why isn't he armed?" "Because carrying a weapon into a confrontation guarantees escalation," Anna replied, though her knuckles were white where she gripped the desk edge. "He's betting on Elena's restraint." The conversation in the lobby grew more heated. Elena stepped closer to Dominic, pointing at him, her face contorted with anger. One of her men moved to intervene, and suddenly everything happened very fast. Dominic caught the man's wrist, twisted, and had him on the ground before the others could react. It was over in seconds, brutal, efficient, and utterly shocking coming from a man Lena had only seen in boardrooms and galas. "He was Special Forces," Anna said quietly. "Before he built all this. People forget that Dominic Vale didn't start with money or connections. He started with skills that kept him alive in places most people don't survive. On screen, Dominic released the man and stepped back, hands raised again. Elena was shouting now, her remaining men looking between her and Dominic with uncertainty. Then police sirens became audible even through the closed office windows. Elena said something final and sharp, then turned and walked out with her men following. Dominic stood in the lobby for a long moment, his expression unreadable, before returning to the elevators. He entered his office 3 minutes later, loosening his tie with hands that weren't quite steady. That was closer than I'd like. What did she say? Lena asked. That if I don't back off her family, she'll make this personal. That she'll stop playing by civilized rules and start playing by the rules of the world I actually operate in. He poured himself a drink from the bar in the corner, downing it in one swallow. She's threatening war. Can she win? No, but she can make it bloody. The Costellos have resources, not like mine, but enough to do damage. And Elena's angry enough to burn her own house down if it means taking me with it. So what do we do? Dominic set down the glass, his expression hardening into something Lena recognized, the cold calculation that meant he was already planning several moves ahead. We accelerate. I was going to give Eduardo 2 weeks to feel the pressure. Now we have maybe 2 days before Elena convinces him to retaliate. Anna, I need the full file on Costello shipping operations. Everything we have on their customs violations, the shipments that don't quite add up, the routes that suggest smuggling. You're going to expose them? Anna asked. I'm going to give them a choice. Negotiate with me now on terms slightly less favorable than my original offer, or I hand everything we have to federal investigators who've been looking for an excuse to tear apart their operation for years. It was ruthless, and it was brilliant, and it made Lena's stomach turn even as she recognized its necessity. That's mutually assured destruction. No, that's leverage. The Costellos can survive losing one property and accepting a partnership. They can't survive federal investigation into trafficking operations. He looked at Lena directly. This is what I meant when I said my world operates differently. I offered Eduardo respect and partnership. Elena just threatened violence. So now I'm offering them survival in exchange for compliance. It's the only language they'll understand at this point. And if they refuse anyway? Then I make good on the threat, their empire crumbles, and I acquire the property at bankruptcy prices after federal seizure. His voice was flat, emotionless. I'd prefer not to destroy them. There's value in having the Costellos as reluctant allies rather than eliminated enemies. But I will do what's necessary. Over the next 18 hours, Lena watched Dominic assemble a case against the Costello family that was devastating in its thoroughness. Shipping manifests that didn't match cargo weights, customs declarations with suspicious patterns, financial transactions that suggested money laundering, nothing definitive on its own, but together they painted a picture that would attract serious federal attention. How did you get all this? Lena asked as she compiled the final dossier. I've been collecting it for years. The Costellos aren't the only family operating in gray areas, and information is currency in my world. I never planned to use it. It was insurance, leverage if I ever needed it. Now I need it. And you'll actually go through with giving this to federal investigators? Dominic looked up from the papers he was reviewing, his gray eyes serious. Yes. I don't bluff, Lena. If I make a threat, I follow through. Otherwise, threats become meaningless. The meeting was set for the following morning, neutral territory again, a private room in a restaurant that catered to people who needed discretion. Dominic insisted Lena come, despite her protests. You need to see how this ends, he said. You've been part of this from the beginning. You deserve to see the conclusion. They arrived 15 minutes early, Dominic's security sweeping the room before allowing them to enter. The space was elegant and windowless, with a single table, 6 chairs, and nothing else. Dominic took the head of the table, Lena to his right, and they waited. Eduardo and Elena arrived exactly on time, accompanied by an older man Lena didn't recognize but whose presence commanded immediate respect. He wore an expensive suit that had seen better days, and his eyes held the particular hardness of someone who'd built power through means that didn't involve boardrooms. Mr. Vale, Eduardo said, his voice cold. You've made your point. Our businesses are suffering. You've demonstrated your influence. Now tell us what you actually want. What I've wanted from the beginning: the property in the warehouse district, partnership in the development, and the Costello name preserved as part of the legacy. The terms are now 70-30 in my favor instead of 80-20, and the timeline is accelerated. You sign today, or I walk. And if we refuse, this from Elena, her voice sharp as a blade. Dominic slid a folder across the table. Then, tomorrow morning, this dossier arrives at the FBI field office. Every shipping record, every suspicious transaction, every pattern that suggests your family has been trafficking goods that aren't declared. I estimate you'd have federal agents knocking on your door within 48 hours. Eduardo opened the folder, his face going gray as he scanned the contents. The older man leaned over to read as well, and Lena saw his jaw tighten with what looked like fury. "You're threatening to destroy us," Eduardo said quietly. "I'm offering you a choice. Take the partnership, keep your legitimate businesses running, and walk away from the shipping operations that are going to attract federal attention eventually anyway, or refuse and lose everything when the government seizes your assets." "This is extortion," Elena spat. "This is business. I offered you fair terms. You refused. I offered you generous terms. You responded with threats of violence. So now I'm offering you survival terms. Take them or don't. But this is the last offer." The older man finally spoke, his voice carrying an accent Eduardo's had mostly lost. "You would actually do this? Destroy a family that's operated in this city for 3 generations? I would do what's necessary to protect my interests and my people. Your granddaughter threatened me with violence yesterday. Your son has spent 2 weeks trying to find ways to undermine my operations in retaliation for my legitimate business proposal. I have no moral obligation to preserve an empire built on smuggling and violence when that empire stands between me and a legal, beneficial development." "Legal?" Elena laughed bitterly. "Everything you do is legal. Everything you touch somehow becomes legitimate, even when we all know the truth underneath." "The truth underneath," Dominic repeated, "is that I learned very early that the way to real lasting power isn't through breaking laws. It's through understanding them so completely that you can operate within them while achieving objectives others would need to break them to accomplish. Your family took a different path. That's not my problem to solve." The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Eduardo looked at his daughter, at his father, at the dossier in front of him that represented the potential destruction of everything they'd built. Lena could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. Pride warring with survival, loyalty to family tradition fighting against recognition of reality. Finally, Eduardo spoke. "If we agree to this, I want guarantees. Written guarantees that this dossier never sees daylight. That you'll use your influence to protect our remaining operations from regulatory harassment. That the Costello name means something in the development beyond just marketing." "Agreed. The dossier gets sealed and filed, insurance for both of us that this partnership stays functional. I'll extend the same protective umbrella to your legitimate businesses that I withdrew when you refused to negotiate. And the community center in the development will be named after your grandfather specifically, the Angelo Costello Center for Community Development. His face on the dedication plaque, his story told to everyone who walks through those doors." It was, Lena realized, exactly the kind of compromise that allowed everyone to save face while Dominic got exactly what he wanted. Eduardo could tell himself he was preserving his grandfather's legacy. Elena could believe they'd negotiated rather than surrendered. And Dominic would own the property, control the development, and have the Costellos bound to him through mutual leverage. "I need to discuss this with my family," Eduardo said. "You have 1 hour. My lawyer is prepared to draw up contracts immediately upon your acceptance. After that, the offer expires and the dossier goes to federal authorities." It was hard, unforgiving, and absolutely effective. Eduardo and Elena left with their grandfather, and Elena found herself alone with Dominic in the silent room. "That was brutal," she said. That was necessary. Eduardo would have negotiated forever if given the chance, hoping I'd eventually lose interest or get distracted by other problems. Elena would have escalated to actual violence if I'd shown any weakness. This way everyone gets something, and we move forward. Do you think they'll accept? Yes. Eduardo is smart enough to recognize when he's lost, and his father, The old man knows the shipping operation was always going to attract federal attention eventually. Better to shut it down on their terms and preserve the legitimate businesses than lose everything to federal seizure. 47 minutes later, Anna called. They're coming back. Eduardo and Elena, no grandfather. Eduardo's carrying papers. When the Costellos returned, Eduardo's face was set in hard lines, but his posture suggested resignation rather than fight. Elena looked furious, but she stayed silent as her father placed documents on the table. We accept your terms, Eduardo said. 70-30 partnership, accelerated timeline, Angelo Costello Community Center. In exchange, the dossier remains sealed, you extend protection to our remaining operations, and we have equal say in how our family name is represented in the development. Agreed. Dominic pulled out his phone, sent a text, and within minutes his lawyer appeared with contracts already prepared. Everything is as we discussed. Take your time reviewing with your counsel. The contract review took another hour, both sides' lawyers combing through language, negotiating minor points, ensuring every detail was captured. Through it all, Elena stared at Dominic with an expression that mixed hatred and something else Lena couldn't quite identify. Respect, maybe, or the recognition of a worthy adversary. Finally, signatures were exchanged. Dominic and Eduardo shook hands, the gesture formal and devoid of warmth. Then Eduardo turned to Lena, studying her with eyes that had seen decades of business dealings, both legal and otherwise. You're part of this now, he said quietly. Whatever protection Dominic extends to his people, you're included in that. But understand, you've made enemies today. My daughter won't forget that you were here, that you helped make this happen. I understand, Lena said, keeping her voice steady despite the warning. I hope you do. Eduardo collected his papers, gestured to Elena, and left without another word. The door closed behind them, and Dominic let out a breath that suggested he'd been under more stress than his calm exterior had revealed. That went better than expected, he said. Better than expected? Eduardo just warned me that I've made enemies. Eduardo warned you that Elena holds grudges, which you already knew. He stood, gathering his own documents. But the partnership is signed, the property is secured, and the Costellos are now bound to me through mutual leverage. That's as good an outcome as we could have hoped for. Lena wanted to feel relieved, wanted to share his satisfaction at a negotiation concluded successfully, but Eduardo's words echoed in her mind, and she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't really over. It was just entering a different phase. The feeling proved prophetic 3 days later when Lena left work at 7 in the evening and found her security detail missing. The sedan that should have been parked across the street was gone, and the two men who'd been maintaining a discreet perimeter were nowhere to be seen. She pulled out her phone to call Dominic, but before she could dial, a van pulled up beside her. The door slid open, and two men grabbed her, pulling her inside before she could scream. Something covered her face. Cloth. Chemicals soaked, the world going fuzzy at the edges. The last thing she heard before consciousness slipped away was a woman's voice, familiar and cold. Get her to the warehouse. Let's see how much Dominic Vale really values his assistant. Elena. Lena woke to darkness and the smell of salt water and old concrete. Her head pounded, her mouth tasted like chemicals, and her hands were bound behind her back with something that felt like zip ties. She was sitting in a chair in a space that echoed when she shifted position. She's awake. A man's voice, unfamiliar, somewhere to her left. Footsteps approached, and then light blazed in her face, blinding after the darkness. Lena squeezed her eyes shut, tried to turn away, but hands gripped her head, forcing her to face forward. Look at me. Elena's voice, hard and commanding. Lena opened her eyes, squinting against the light. Elena stood 3 feet away, backlit so her features were shadowed, but her posture radiating controlled fury. Do you know why you're here? Elena asked. Because you're trying to get to Dominic through me. Lena's voice came out hoarse but steady. Because you think hurting me will give you leverage. Smart girl. Though not quite smart enough or you wouldn't have gotten in that car with Dominic Vale in the first place. Elena moved closer, and now Lena could see her face, beautiful and cold, eyes holding an anger that had been building for years. I told you to leave. I warned you that everyone close to Dominic gets hurt, but you didn't listen. So this is my fault? This is inevitable. You chose to stand beside a man who destroys everything he touches. Now you pay the price. And what price is that exactly? Lena asked, trying to keep fear out of her voice. Are you going to kill me? Torture me? Send Dominic my fingers until he gives you back your property? Elena's smile was sharp. Nothing so crude. I'm going to give you a choice, Lena Park. You can call Dominic right now, tell him where you are, and beg him to come save you. Or you can tell me everything you know about his business operations, his vulnerabilities, his secrets. Give me enough to truly hurt him, and you walk out of here. You think I'd betray him to save myself? I think everyone has a breaking point. The question is whether yours comes before or after Dominic decides you're not worth rescuing. It was psychological warfare, designed to make Lena doubt not just her own courage, but Dominic's loyalty. And the terrifying part was that it worked. Because Patricia Chen's words at the gala came back to her, loyalty flows upward until it doesn't. The moment you become more valuable to his enemies than to him, everything changes. He'll come for me, Lena said, putting more confidence in her voice than she felt. Will he? You're an assistant, Lena, an employee. You've worked for him for what, 2 weeks? Do you really think he'll risk his empire, his carefully constructed alliances, his position in this city, to save one woman who's barely more than a stranger? I think he protects what's his, and I'm his. Elena laughed, the sound genuinely amused. You actually believe that? You've bought into his power, his control, his image of himself as some kind of benevolent emperor. But I know Dominic Vale, Lena. I know him in ways you never will, and I can tell you with absolute certainty, when it comes down to choosing between you and his empire, you lose, every single time. Then I guess we'll find out. Lena met Elena's gaze directly, refusing to look away despite the fear coursing through her. Because I'm not telling you anything. Do whatever you're going to do. For a long moment, Elena simply stared at her. Then she nodded slowly, something like respect flickering across her features. All right, we'll do this the hard way. She pulled out a phone, dialed a number, and held it up to Lena's ear. The line rang twice, then Dominic's voice came through, tight with tension. Who is this? It's Elena. I have something of yours. A pause that felt like eternity. Then, if you've hurt her, she's fine for now. But we need to have a conversation, Dominic, about our partnership, about the terms you forced on my family, about what happens when you push too hard and assume there won't be consequences. Name your terms. His voice was utterly flat, stripped of emotion, and somehow that made it more frightening than if he'd raged. The development deal is void. You return our property, you dissolve the partnership, and you stay out of Castello business permanently. Do that, and I give you back your assistant in one piece. And if I refuse? Then you'll need to find a new assistant. I hear the last one is living very comfortably in another country. Perhaps this one can join her. Lena heard something in the background on Dominic's end, voices, movement, the sound of preparations being made. How do I know she's even alive? Elena moved the phone to Lena's mouth. Tell him. I'm okay, Lena said, her voice stronger than she expected. Don't give them what they want, don't... Elena pulled the phone away. Brave words. Let's see how brave she stays. She ended the call, turning back to Lena. Now we wait. Either Dominic agrees to my terms and you go home, or he decides you're expendable and we find out exactly how committed you are to protecting his secrets. He won't agree, Lena said with certainty. He doesn't negotiate with threats. No, he makes threats, which is why this is going to be very interesting. Elena left then, her footsteps echoing away into darkness. The light stayed on, harsh and unforgiving, and Lena was alone with her thoughts and her fear and the terrible question Elena had planted in her mind. Would Dominic actually come for her? Or would he make the calculation that she wasn't worth risking everything he'd built? The hours that followed felt endless. Men came and went, checking her restraints, offering water she refused, speaking in low voices about timelines and contingencies. Through it all, Lena kept her breathing steady, her mind focused, refusing to let panic take over. If Dominic didn't come, she'd find her own way out. She'd survived worse than this: poverty, loss, Years of fighting just to stay afloat. A warehouse and some criminals with delusions of power weren't going to break her. But beneath the bravado, fear whispered that maybe Elena was right. Maybe Lana was just another piece on Dominic's chessboard, valuable only until she became a liability. Maybe this was the moment she learned exactly what it meant to be part of his world. Then, somewhere in the distance, she heard it. Gunfire. The gunfire started as sharp cracks in the distance, then grew closer with terrifying speed. Lena's guards reacted immediately, weapons appearing from concealed holsters, their casual demeanor transforming into combat readiness in seconds. She heard shouting in Italian, footsteps running, and then an explosion that shook the warehouse hard enough to send dust cascading from the rafters above. "Get her to the back!" Elena's voice cut through the chaos, sharp with authority. "Now!" Rough hands grabbed Lena's chair, dragging her across concrete that scraped and bumped beneath the metal legs. She tried to twist free, but the zip ties held firm, cutting into her wrists with every movement. The warehouse was larger than she'd realized in the darkness, a cavernous space of shadows and echoes, punctuated now by muzzle flashes that lit the darkness like lightning. Another explosion, closer this time, and suddenly the main doors blew inward with a concussive force that sent two of Elena's men flying backward. Through the smoke and debris, figures moved with military precision, advancing in formation that spoke of professional training. Leading them, moving with the same controlled violence Lena had seen in the lobby when he'd taken down Elena's guard, was Dominic Vale. He wasn't dressed for the office anymore. Tactical gear, Kevlar vest, a weapon in his hands that he wielded with the comfortable familiarity of someone who'd done this before. His face was set in lines of absolute focus, gray eyes scanning the space with predatory intensity. When those eyes found Lena, something shifted in his expression. Relief mixed with fury so cold it was almost frightening. "Let her go, Elena." His voice carried across the warehouse with perfect clarity despite the chaos. "This ends now." Elena appeared from behind a stack of shipping containers, using Lena's chair as a shield. She had a gun pressed against Lena's temple, her hand steady despite the violence erupting around them. "You brought an army to a negotiation, Dominic? I thought we were more civilized than this. You kidnapped an unarmed woman. Civilization ended when you made that choice." He advanced slowly, his team fanning out to cover angles, cutting off escape routes with practiced efficiency. "Last chance, release her, and everyone walks away breathing." "Or what? You'll kill me? Kill my men? Burn down everything my family built?" Elena's laugh was sharp, brittle. "You've already done that, Dominic. You've already destroyed us piece by piece. What's left to threaten me with? Your life, your father's life, your grandfather's legacy turning to ashes." Dominic stopped 20 feet away, weapon trained on Elena with unwavering precision. "You think I came here to negotiate? I came here to get back what's mine. How that happens is up to you." The standoff stretched for seconds that felt like hours. Lena could feel Elena's tension in the trembling of the gun barrel against her skin, could hear the woman's breathing quicken with anger and something that might have been fear. Around them, Elena's remaining men stood frozen, caught between loyalty and survival instinct as they stared down Dominic's superior force. "She's not yours," Elena said finally, her voice carrying an edge of desperation beneath the anger. "She's a person, Dominic, not property, not something you own just because you pay her salary. When will you understand that people aren't tools to be used and discarded?" "I understand perfectly, which is why I'm here risking everything to get her back." Dominic's gaze never wavered from Elena's face. "You wanted to know if I valued her enough to come? Here's your answer. I brought 12 men. I called in every favor I had to find this location, and I will burn this entire warehouse to the ground if that's what it takes. So ask yourself, are you really willing to die over a property deal that's already signed and sealed?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Lena watched calculations flicker across Elena's face, pride warring with pragmatism, rage fighting against the cold reality of being outmaneuvered and outgunned. "You won't shoot," Elena said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Not with the gun against her head. You can't risk it." "You're right. I won't." Dominic lowered his weapon slightly, a gesture of de-escalation that somehow made him seem more dangerous rather than less. but Marcus will. At the name, one of Dominic's men, positioned on a catwalk above them that Lena hadn't even noticed, shifted slightly, the barrel of his rifle tracking to a point just past Lena's shoulder. Elena's eyes widened fractionally as she realized she was already in someone's crosshairs. Former Marine sniper, Dominic continued conversationally, though his tone carried an undercurrent of absolute lethality. 2 tours. Commendations for marksmanship under combat conditions. He can put a round through your brainstem from that distance without even breathing hard. So here's what's going to happen, Elena. You're going to very carefully remove that gun from Lena's head. You're going to set it down, and then you're going to step away. And if I don't? Then Marcus does his job, you die, and your family spends the next decade trying to rebuild from the federal investigation I'll trigger before your body hits the ground. Lena felt Elena's hand shaking now, the gun barrel trembling against her skin. She wanted to say something, wanted to diffuse the situation somehow, but anything she said might trigger exactly the violence everyone was trying to avoid. "This isn't over," Elena whispered, but her hand was moving, slowly lowering the weapon. "Yes, it is." Dominic's voice was absolute. "Set down the gun, Elena. Don't make me kill you." The weapon clattered to the concrete floor. Elena stepped back, hands raised, her face a mask of fury and defeat. Immediately, Dominic's men moved in, securing the remaining Costello soldiers with zip ties and professional efficiency. Within 90 seconds, the situation was completely controlled. Elena was being escorted toward a vehicle outside, and Dominic was kneeling beside Lena's chair. His hands were gentle as they cut through the zip ties binding her wrists, but she could feel the tremor in his fingers that betrayed how much control it was taking for him to stay calm. "Are you hurt?" His voice was low, meant only for her. "Did they? I'm fine." Lena's wrists ached as circulation returned, and her body was discovering about a dozen bruises from being dragged across concrete, but nothing was broken. "Elena wanted information about your business. I didn't tell her anything." Something passed across Dominic's face, pride mixed with an emotion she couldn't quite identify. "I know you didn't. If you had, she would have let you go." He helped her stand, steadying her when her legs proved shakier than expected. "Can you walk?" "Yes, Dominic." She looked up at him, seeing past the tactical gear and the weapons to the man who'd just orchestrated a military-style rescue for an assistant he'd known for 2 weeks. "You came." "Of course I came." He said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world, like there had never been any question. "Did you think I wouldn't?" "Elena said you'd make a calculation, that I wasn't worth risking your empire." Dominic's expression hardened, and she saw fury there, not at her, but at Elena for planting that seed of doubt. "Elena doesn't understand that some calculations aren't about profit and loss. You're part of my organization, Lena. That means you're under my protection. Anyone who touches you answers to me, regardless of what it costs." It should have felt possessive, should have triggered her instincts about autonomy and independence. Instead, it felt like safety. Like standing in the shelter of something immovable while storms raged outside. One of Dominic's men approached. "Sir, we need to move. Police will respond to the explosion soon, and we need to be gone before they arrive." "Agreed. Marcus, you and your team handle cleanup. Make sure nothing here traces back to us. Everyone else, we're extracting in 2 minutes." Dominic kept one hand on Lena's elbow, steadying her as they moved toward the warehouse exit. "What about the Costellos?" "Elena and her men are secured in transport, awaiting your instructions." Dominic was silent for a moment, and Lena could almost see him running through options, consequences, the chess game that never really stopped. "Take them to the marina. Warehouse 3. I'll deal with them there." "Are you going to kill them?" Lena asked quietly, once they were alone in the back of an SUV, the warehouse receding behind them. "No. But I'm going to make sure this never happens again." He pulled out his phone, typed something, then turned to her with an expression that was equal parts exhaustion and determination. "Elena crossed a line tonight. She didn't just threaten my business or my interests. She targeted someone under my protection. That requires a response." "What kind of response?" "The kind that makes it clear to everyone in this city that there are consequences for going after my people. The kind that ensures the Costellos never forget what happens when they break the rules." The marina was dark and quiet when they arrived, just the sound of water against hulls and the distant cry of nightbirds. Warehouse 3 was smaller than the place Elena had held Lena, cleaner, clearly used for legitimate storage rather than criminal activities. Inside, Elena and her men were seated on the floor, hands still bound, surrounded by Dominic's security. Elena looked up when they entered, her eyes going to Lena first before settling on Dominic with unconcealed hatred. "So what now? You execute us? Make us disappear? This is what you've been building toward, isn't it?" "No." Dominic stood before her, hands in his pockets, looking more like a businessman than someone who'd just orchestrated a military assault. "Execution would be too simple, too clean. You'd become a martyr to your family, a symbol of Costello pride standing against Vale oppression. I need something more permanent than that." He pulled out a tablet, pulled up documents, and showed them to Elena. "This is the full dossier I threatened your father with. Every shipping violation, every suspicious transaction, every pattern that suggests criminal activity. As of 20 minutes ago, copies of this dossier were delivered to 3 federal agencies, along with my formal complaint as a concerned business owner who discovered irregularities while conducting due diligence on a potential partner." Elena's face went white. "You wouldn't. The partnership, the agreement was void the moment you kidnapped Lena. You broke our deal, Elena. Now you face the consequences." He pulled up another document. "This is a statement from your father, recorded 1 hour ago, in which he expresses shock and dismay at learning about criminal activities conducted by his daughter without his knowledge. He's cooperating fully with investigators, providing information about your specific role in the shipping operation, and distancing himself and the rest of the Costello family from your actions. He wouldn't betray me. Family is everything. Family is survival." Dominic's voice was utterly cold. "I gave Eduardo a choice. Sacrifice you, and preserve the rest of the Costello empire, or lose everything defending someone who just committed a felony kidnapping. He made the rational choice." Lena watched Elena's face crumble as the reality settled over her. Her own father had given her up to save himself and the family business. It was ruthless, and it was brilliant, and it ensured that Elena would face federal prosecution while the rest of the Costellos remained bound to Dominic through the partnership agreement. "You destroyed me," Elena whispered. "You destroyed yourself. I just made sure the collateral damage was limited to you alone." Dominic nodded to his men. "Federal agents will be here in approximately 15 minutes. I suggest you use that time to consider how you want to handle questioning. Cooperation might reduce your sentence from 20 years to 10. He turned and walked toward the door, Lena following. Behind them, Elena's voice rang out, raw with fury and desperation. "This isn't over, Dominic. You think federal prison will stop me? You think you've won?" Dominic paused at the doorway, looked back with an expression that held no triumph, just weary certainty. "It's been over since the moment you took her, Elena. You just didn't realize it yet." Outside, dawn was breaking over the water, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that seemed absurdly peaceful after the night's violence. Lena breathed in salt air and freedom, her hands still aching from the zip ties, her mind still processing everything that had happened. "You had this planned from the moment she called," Lena said. It wasn't a question. "From the moment my security detail reported being forcibly removed from their position outside your apartment. I knew immediately it was Elena, and I knew she'd take you somewhere she felt safe, family territory, probably the shipping district where she grew up. It took 2 hours to narrow down the location and assemble the team." He looked at her, really looked at her for the first time since the rescue. "I'm sorry I couldn't get there faster." "You got there in time. That's what matters." Lena wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the mild temperature. "Elena was right about one thing, though. I didn't understand what your world really meant, what it costs to be part of it. And now that you do understand?" It was the question beneath all the others. Was she staying or going? Could she live in a world where business negotiations ended in kidnapping and rescue operations, where federal investigations were weapons deployed against enemies, where the line between legal and illegal was so blurred it barely existed? "I want to go home," she said finally. "Take a shower, sleep for about 12 hours, and process everything that just happened. Then we'll talk about what comes next." Dominic nodded, accepting her need for space without argument. I'll have a security team at your apartment until we're certain there are no other threats. And Lena. He hesitated, choosing words carefully. Whatever you decide about continuing this position, you have my protection. That doesn't end just because you might choose to leave. Thank you. She climbed into the SUV, exhaustion hitting her like a physical weight. Dominic, why did you really come for me? Not the official reason about protecting your organization, the real reason. He was quiet for a long moment, standing in the dawn light, looking more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. Because somewhere in the last 2 weeks, you stopped being just an employee. You became someone I couldn't afford to lose. The SUV pulled away before she could respond, leaving her with those words and their implications to untangle alongside everything else. The drive home passed in silence, her mind cycling through images. Elena's gun at her temple. Dominic's face when he'd found her. The cold calculation in his voice as he'd destroyed Elena's life with surgical precision. This was the world she'd chosen, not the sanitized version she'd imagined, where she could observe from a safe distance and learn how power worked. The real version, where people got hurt, where violence was a tool deployed strategically, where loyalty was tested with guns and federal investigations. And somehow, impossibly, she still wasn't sure she wanted to leave it. The security detail Dominic promised was already in place when she arrived home. Different men than before, harder looking, arranged in positions that provided complete coverage of her building's entrances. They nodded acknowledgement as she passed, but didn't try to follow her inside, respecting her boundary about privacy, even while ensuring her safety. Her apartment felt simultaneously foreign and comforting. Everything was exactly as she'd left it the day before. Was it really only yesterday? But she was fundamentally different. The woman who'd left for work thinking about meeting schedules and contract reviews would never have survived what Elena put her through. But the woman who'd returned, who'd faced down a gun and refused to break, who'd been rescued by a man who commanded private armies, was someone she barely recognized. The shower was as hot as she could stand, washing away the warehouse smell and the chemical residue from whatever Elena's men had used to knock her out. The bruises on her wrists were already darkening to purple, physical proof that last night had been real and not some fever dream of danger and rescue. When she finally collapsed into bed, she expected nightmares. Instead, she slept dreamlessly for 14 hours straight, her body demanding rest that her mind was too exhausted to deny. She woke to find her phone full of messages, one from her mother asking about dinner plans, blissfully unaware of how close she'd come to losing her daughter. One from Anna asking if she needed anything, and 17 from Dominic, starting with checking in and progressing through increasing concern to, if you don't respond in the next hour, I'm coming over regardless of boundaries. She typed back a simple response. I'm okay. Need more time. We'll call tomorrow. His reply came immediately. Take all the time you need. The next 2 days passed in a strange limbo. Lena stayed in her apartment, ordered food delivery, and tried to process what her life had become. She researched Elena Castello online, finding articles about a federal raid on shipping operations, about arrests made, about a prominent family facing charges for customs violations and trafficking. Eduardo Castello appeared in a press conference, grave and dignified, expressing shock at his daughter's activities and pledging full cooperation with authorities. It was a masterful performance, one that preserved the Castello family's remaining businesses while sacrificing Elena completely. Exactly as Dominic had planned. On the third day, Lena finally felt ready to return to the office. The security detail remained in place, different faces on a rotating schedule but always present. She'd stopped being bothered by their presence and started seeing them as part of her new reality, a reality where she needed armed guards because she worked for a man whose enemies responded to business negotiations with kidnapping. The office felt different when she arrived. People looked at her with new awareness, like word had spread about what happened. Anna greeted her with surprising warmth, a quick hug that broke protocol but felt genuine. We're glad you're back, Anna said simply. It wasn't the same without you. Dominic was in his office, and when Lena appeared in the doorway, he looked up with an expression that cycled through relief, concern, and careful neutrality in the span of seconds. You came back, he said, the words carrying weight beyond their simple meaning. I did. Lena stepped inside, closing the door behind her. We need to talk. I know. He gestured to the chairs by his window, moving to join her in what felt like neutral territory rather than the power dynamic of his desk. I wasn't sure you would return. I would have understood if you'd chosen to leave. Part of me wanted to. Part of me spent the last 3 days thinking about how much safer and simpler my life would be if I walked away from all of this. Lena looked out at the city, at the empire Dominic controlled from this tower. But I keep coming back to something you said, about how some calculations aren't about profit and loss. I meant that. I know you did. And I realize that I'm making the same calculation. This job, this world, it's dangerous and morally complicated, and it's pulled me into situations I never imagined facing. But it's also the first time in my life I've felt like I'm part of something that matters, like I'm more than just another struggling graduate trying to pay off debt and survive. She turned to face him directly. Elena was wrong about you. You didn't come for me because I was property or because you were protecting an investment. You came because somewhere in these few weeks I became important to you. And you... She paused, acknowledging a truth she'd been avoiding. You've become important to me too. Dominic's expression shifted, something vulnerable breaking through the careful control he usually maintained. Lena, I'm not finished. She held up a hand. I'm staying, but things need to change. I need to know the full scope of what I'm involved in. No more surprises, no more discovering new layers of danger after I've already committed. And I need real training, not just how to navigate your world socially, but how to protect myself if something like this happens again. Agreed. All of it. Dominic leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his full attention focused on her. I should have been more transparent from the beginning. I thought I was protecting you by keeping you at a distance from the darker aspects of my operations. Instead, I left you vulnerable. You also came for me with a private army when Elena took me, so maybe we're even. His smile was slight but genuine. Not even close to even. But I appreciate the sentiment. He stood, moving to his desk and pulling out a folder. This is everything. Every business operation, every gray area, every relationship that exists outside of legal frameworks. Read it all. Ask me anything. I won't keep secrets from you anymore. Lena took the folder, feeling its weight both literal and metaphorical. And the training. Marcus, the sniper who had Elena in his sights, he used to run tactical training for private security. I'll have him work with you. Basic self-defense, situational awareness, weapons familiarization if you're comfortable with that. You'll never be helpless again. It was more than she'd expected, more than she'd hoped for. Dominic was offering her real partnership, real inclusion in his world, with all the knowledge and protection that entailed. There's one more thing, Lena said. Elena thought I was yours because you pay my salary, because I work for you. I need you to understand that I'm not anyone's possession. If I'm staying, if I'm going to be part of this, it's as a partner, not an employee who can be commanded or controlled. I know. Dominic's voice was quiet but firm. That's what I meant when I said you'd stopped being just an employee. You're the first person in years who's stood up to me, who's challenged my decisions, who's proven they can survive in my world without losing themselves in it. I don't want to own you, Lena. I want to work with you, and maybe, he hesitated, maybe eventually build something with you that goes beyond business. The implication hung in the air between them, acknowledging the attraction and connection that had been building since that first confrontation about dress codes. But Lena wasn't ready to address that yet, wasn't ready to add romantic complexity to an already complicated situation. One thing at a time, she said gently. First, let me learn everything in that folder. Let me understand what I'm really part of. Then we can talk about what else this might become. Fair enough. Dominic extended his hand and she took it, their handshake feeling like a renewal of the agreement they'd made weeks ago, but deeper now, informed by violence and rescue and the knowledge that they'd both made choices that bound them together in ways that went far beyond employment contracts. Welcome back, Lena Park, he said. Let's build an empire. And standing there in his office, bruised but unbroken, committed to a path that would demand everything she had, Lena found herself smiling. Let's, she agreed. The folder Dominic gave her weighed less than 2 pounds. but contained enough information to bring down a dozen powerful people and dismantle operations that spanned 3 states. Lena spent a week reading it, cross-referencing details, understanding the intricate web of legitimate businesses that provided cover for less legitimate activities. What surprised her most wasn't the scope of Dominic's empire. She'd already guessed it was extensive, but how much of it was actually legal? "You're not a crime boss," she said one evening as they reviewed quarterly projections in his office. "You're a businessman who occasionally operates in gray areas when the law is too slow or too corrupt to serve justice." Dominic looked up from his computer, something like relief crossing his features. "That's the most generous interpretation anyone's ever given my work. It's also accurate. The foundation work is real. The community development projects actually help people. Even the pressure you applied to the Costellos, it was ruthless, but it removed a family that was actively trafficking illegal goods and replaced them with a partnership that's already creating jobs and legitimate opportunities." She closed the folder. "You're not perfect, Dominic, but you're not the monster Elena tried to paint you as either." Elena sees what she wants to see. We were together for 2 years, and she spent most of that time trying to turn me into someone I wasn't, either completely legitimate or fully criminal. She couldn't accept that I exist in between. "What happened between you two? Really?" Dominic was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant with memory. "I loved her, or I thought I did. But Elena wanted me to choose, give up everything I'd built and run away with her, or embrace the criminal empire her family represented and merge our operations. When I refused both options, when I insisted on building something that was mine and on my terms, she took it as betrayal. So this was always personal for her. Everything with Elena is personal. She doesn't separate business from emotion, which makes her dangerous but also predictable." He turned back to his screen. "The federal case against her is solid. She'll be sentenced within 6 months. After that, she won't be our problem anymore." But Lena heard something in his tone, regret maybe, or the ghost of feelings that hadn't quite died despite everything. "Do you still love her?" "No. But I regret what she became. What we both became trying to force each other into shapes that didn't fit." He met Lena's eyes. "I won't make that mistake again. With anyone." The weight of that statement settled between them, acknowledging the thing they'd both been dancing around for weeks. The attraction that sparked every time they were alone together. The way Dominic's hand would linger when he passed her documents. The way Lena found herself staying late at the office, not because work demanded it, but because leaving meant being apart from him. "We should probably talk about this," Lena said carefully, "about what's happening between us." "Should we?" Dominic's voice was neutral, but his eyes held intensity that made her pulse quicken. "Or should we acknowledge that we're both adults, we're both aware of the complications, and we're both choosing to see where this leads anyway? That's not very professional." "No, but I stopped being just your boss somewhere around the moment I stormed a warehouse with a tactical team to get you back." He stood, moving around his desk in that predatory way that should have been threatening, but instead sent heat through her veins. "The question isn't whether we're going to act on this, Lena. The question is when, and what rules we establish to make sure it doesn't destroy everything we're building." He was right, and they both knew it. The chemistry had been there from that first confrontation, building through every challenge and crisis until it was impossible to ignore. "Rules," Lena repeated, trying to keep her breathing steady as he moved closer. "Like what?" "Like honesty. Complete transparency about what we want, what we're feeling, what scares us. No games, no manipulation, no using the personal relationship to influence business decisions, or vice versa." He stopped a foot away, close enough that she could feel the heat of him, smell his cologne mixed with something uniquely him. "And boundaries. You tell me when I'm crossing lines and I do the same. This only works if we both have the power to say no." "Those are good rules." "I thought so." His hand came up, fingers brushing her cheek with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with everything she knew about his capacity for violence. "So, here's me being honest. I want you, Lena Park. I've wanted you since you stood in this office and refused to change your clothes for any amount of money. I want to know what you taste like, what sounds you make when you lose control, what it feels like to wake up next to you. And it terrifies me because everyone I've ever wanted has either tried to change me or been destroyed by proximity to my world. Lena's heart hammered against her ribs, desire and fear warring for dominance. And here's me being honest back. I want you too. But I'm afraid that if we do this, if we cross that line, I'll lose myself in you the way Elena did. That I'll stop being Lena Park, your equal partner, and become just another woman in Dominic Vale's orbit. Then we make sure that doesn't happen. We build this intentionally, with the same intelligence we bring to everything else. His thumb traced her lower lip, the touch sending electricity through her entire body. We go slow. We check in constantly. And the moment either of us feels like we're losing ourselves, we pull back and recalibrate. You make it sound so rational. Someone has to be, because what I'm feeling right now is anything but rational. He leaned in, his breath warm against her ear. Tell me to stop, and I will. Tell me you need more time, and I'll wait. But if you want this even half as much as I do, then stop running from it and let us find out what we could be together. Lena's answer was to close the distance between them, her lips finding his in a kiss that started gentle and turned hungry within seconds. Dominic made a sound low in his throat, his arms coming around her waist, pulling her against him with a need that matched her own. The kiss deepened, years of control giving way to want that had been building since the moment they'd met. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dominic rested his forehead against hers. We should probably not do this in the office. Probably not, Lena agreed, though she made no move to step away. My place is 10 minutes from here. We could continue this conversation somewhere more private. That's a terrible idea for so many reasons. Absolutely terrible, he agreed, then kissed her again. They made it to his penthouse in 8 minutes. The elevator ride up filled with stolen kisses and whispered promises about taking things slow that they both knew were lies. Dominic's apartment was exactly what she'd expected. Minimalist luxury, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, art that cost more than most people made in a year. But Lena barely noticed any of it, too focused on the man whose careful control was fracturing with every touch. What happened next was inevitable and perfect and complicated in ways that would take months to fully understand. They learned each other with the same intensity they brought to everything else. Dominic's hands mapping the curves of her body like territory to be claimed. Lena discovering the scars that marked his skin and the vulnerability he hid beneath layers of power and control. When they finally came together, it felt like something fundamental shifting into place, like a partnership that had been building through business and crisis finally finding its full expression. Afterward, lying tangled in sheets that probably cost more than her monthly rent, Lena traced the scar on Dominic's shoulder. A bullet wound, she realized, from some past violence he'd survived. Tell me about this one, she said quietly. Afghanistan. IED went off too close, and I got hit by shrapnel while pulling my team out. Medical discharge, and I came home with skills that didn't translate to civilian life and anger that had nowhere to go. His fingers played with her hair absently. I was 24, broke, and dangerous. Should have ended up dead or in prison. Instead, I met a man who taught me that violence could be a tool rather than a compulsion, that intelligence and ruthlessness combined properly could build empires. What happened to him? He retired to somewhere tropical and warm, probably on a beach surrounded by people who have no idea what he used to be. Dominic's smile was slight. He checks in once a year, asks if I've gone completely over to the dark side yet. I tell him I'm working on it. And have you? Gone over? I don't know. Some days I think I'm building something that actually matters, that helps more people than it hurts. Other days I wonder if I'm just a criminal with better lawyers and a talent for public relations. He looked at her seriously. Which is why I need you, Lena. You see me clearly, both the good and the bad. And you don't flinch from either. You make me want to be the better version of myself. That's a lot of pressure. It's also the truth. And we promised honesty, remember? Over the following months, they built something that defied easy categorization. Professionally, Lena became Dominic's true partner, not just executing his vision, but shaping it, challenging his assumptions, bringing perspectives he'd never considered. The Castello development broke ground with Eduardo and his father present for the ceremony. the family's name preserved even as Elena served her sentence in federal prison. The community center that bore Angelo Costello's name became a model for similar projects across the city. Personally, Lena and Dominic navigated the complicated space between business partners and lovers with varying degrees of success. They fought spectacularly, usually about whether Dominic was being too ruthless or Lena was being too idealistic. They reconciled with equal intensity, learning each other's boundaries and triggers, figuring out how to be together without losing their individual identities. The training Marcus provided proved invaluable. Lena learned to shoot, to fight, to read situations before they became dangerous. She'd never be a soldier, but she'd also never be helpless again. The knowledge changed her, gave her confidence that showed in how she moved through Dominic's world. No longer an outsider trying to belong, but someone who'd earned her place through competence and courage. A year after Elena's kidnapping attempt, Lena was reviewing contracts in her office when Anna appeared with an expression that suggested complicated news. Elena Costello requested a meeting with you. She's being transferred to a different facility and asked if you'd visit before she goes. Lena looked up, surprised. Why would she want to see me? She didn't say, but the request came through official channels and her lawyer says it's important. Dominic, predictably, hated the idea. She tried to kill you, Lena, or at least use you as leverage in a way that could have gotten you killed. Why would you even consider going? Because maybe she has information we need, or maybe she wants closure. Either way, I'd rather face her on my terms than wonder what she wanted. Lena met his concerned gaze steadily. I'm not the same person she kidnapped, Dominic. I'm not afraid of her anymore. The prison was exactly as grim as expected. Concrete and steel, and the particular despair that came from knowing freedom was measured in years rather than days. Elena looked thinner than Lena remembered, her beauty sharpened by hardship into something almost severe, but her eyes still held that fierce intelligence that had made her dangerous. They met in a private visiting room, a guard visible through the window but giving them space to talk. Elena studied Lena for a long moment before speaking. You look different, harder. Prison will do that to a person, though you're holding up better than I expected. Elena's laugh was dry. Flattery from Dominic Vale's woman. I must really be pathetic now. She leaned back in her chair. I didn't ask you here to reminisce. I asked because I owe you an apology. That was unexpected enough that Lena stayed silent, waiting. I told myself I took you because of the business with my father, because Dominic forced us into that partnership. But the truth is I took you because you represented everything I lost when Dominic and I fell apart. You stood beside him the way I used to. You challenged him without trying to change him. You were what I could never be, strong enough to exist in his world without being consumed by it. Elena's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. I was jealous, and I let that jealousy turn into something cruel and stupid that cost me everything. Elena, let me finish. You were right not to betray him. Dominic Vale is a lot of things, but he protects what's his, and you're his in ways I never was, because you chose it freely rather than trying to possess him. She paused. Take care of him, Lena. He acts like he's invincible, but everyone has breaking points. Make sure he doesn't find his. Why are you telling me this? Because in another life we might have been friends. Because you deserve to know that what you have with him is real, not just another power game. And because... Elena smiled sadly. Because I'd like to think I'm capable of growth, even in here. The visit lasted another 20 minutes, surprisingly civil, almost cathartic. When Lena left, she felt like she'd closed a chapter that had been hanging open since that night in the warehouse. Elena would serve her time, and maybe she'd emerge better for it. Or maybe she'd emerge harder, more broken. Either way, it was no longer Lena's burden to carry. She told Dominic about the conversation that night, curled against him in his bed, the city lights creating patterns on the ceiling above them. She apologized, he said, sounding genuinely surprised. I didn't think Elena was capable of that. People change. Sometimes prison breaks them. Sometimes it gives them clarity. Lena traced circles on his chest absently. She told me to take care of you. I don't need taking care of. Everyone needs taking care of. Even dangerous men who run empires and keep tactical teams on speed dial. Dominic caught her hand, brought it to his lips. Is that what you're doing? Taking care of me? I'm partnering with you. There's a difference. She rose on one elbow, looking down at his face in the dimness. Elena was right about one thing, though. What we have is real. It's complicated and sometimes messy and definitely not what I imagined when I took this job. But it's real. It is, he agreed. Which is why I need to ask you something. He reached for the nightstand, pulled out a small box that made Lena's breath catch. Inside was a ring, not ostentatious, but clearly expensive, a single diamond set in platinum with elegant simplicity. This isn't a proposal, Dominic said quickly. Not yet, but it's a promise. A year ago, you walked into my office and refused to compromise yourself for money. You've challenged me, survived being kidnapped because of me, learned to navigate a world that destroys most people, and somehow you're still exactly who you were when we met, just stronger. He took the ring from the box. This is my promise that when I do propose, when we're both ready for that step, it'll be because we've built something worth protecting, something that makes us both better than we'd be apart. Lena felt tears stain her eyes, happy tears for once, rather than the stressed or angry tears that had marked too much of this year. That's the most romantic non-proposal I've ever received. I'm working on the actual proposal. It's going to involve significantly more planning and considerably less improvisation. He slipped the ring onto her right hand, a placeholder for the promise it represented. But I wanted you to know that I'm committed to this, to us, to building an empire together that's worth the cost of everything we've sacrificed to create it. An empire, Lena repeated, looking at the ring catching light from the window. That's one way to describe a relationship. I prefer to think of it as a partnership between equals who happen to love each other and also occasionally dismantle criminal organizations before breakfast. She laughed, the sound free and genuine. When you put it that way, how can I refuse? The next 2 years passed in a blur of growth and transformation. The Castello development became a model copied in 3 other cities. The foundation expanded to include job training, microloan programs, and educational initiatives that actually changed lives. Dominic began systematically transitioning his operations from the gray areas into full legitimacy, using his influence to advocate for policy changes that addressed the gaps in law that criminals exploited. It wasn't perfect. There were still moral compromises, still moments when Lena questioned whether they were truly making a difference or just becoming more sophisticated in their rationalizations. But the direction was clear, toward building something that could withstand scrutiny, that created more value than it extracted, that gave back to the communities that had sustained Dominic's rise. Lena herself evolved beyond recognition from the struggling graduate who'd walked into Vale Tower desperate for a salary. She developed her own network, her own influence, her own reputation as someone who could navigate between worlds with integrity intact. People sought her counsel, valued her judgment, trusted her in ways that had nothing to do with being Dominic Vale's partner and everything to do with who she'd become. 3 years to the day after that first confrontation about dress codes, Dominic called her into his office with the kind of nervous energy she'd never seen from him before. The space had changed since she'd first entered it, warmer now, with photos on the walls from the various projects they'd completed, a shelf of awards and commendations from community organizations. "Remember when I said the actual proposal would involve more planning?" he asked as she entered. "I remember you being characteristically cryptic about it, yes. Come with me." He led her to the roof of Vale Tower, where she'd never been before. The space had been transformed into a garden, real grass, flowering plants, string lights creating constellations overhead. In the center was a small gathering of people who'd become important in her life over the past years. Anna, Marcus, her mother looking healthier than she had in years, Eduardo Castello with his father beside him. "What is this?" Lena asked, her heart beginning to race. "This is me doing what I should have done 2 years ago when I gave you that promise ring." Dominic took both her hands, and she realized his were trembling slightly. This man who faced down criminals and federal investigators without flinching was nervous about proposing. "Lena Park, you walked into my life and changed everything. You challenged me to be better, to build something that mattered, to stop hiding behind moral ambiguity and actually commit to creating value instead of just extracting it. You survived being kidnapped because you refused to betray me. You've learned to navigate my world without losing yourself. You've become not just my partner in business, but my partner in everything that matters. He dropped to one knee, pulling out a ring that was clearly the companion to the promise ring she still wore on her right hand. I'm asking you to marry me, not because I own you or control you or because it makes business sense. I'm asking because I love you, because I can't imagine building the rest of my life with anyone else, and because every empire is meaningless if you're ruling it alone. His gray eyes held hers with an intensity that stole her breath. So what do you say, Lena? Will you marry me and help me figure out how to be the man you see when you look at me? Lena felt tears streaming down her face, felt her mother crying behind her, felt the weight of 3 years of transformation and growth, and becoming someone she could be proud of. The answer had never been in question. Yes, she said, her voice breaking with joy. Yes, I'll marry you, but Dominic? Yes? We're not building an empire. We're building a life. There's a difference. His smile, genuine, unguarded, radiating happiness, transformed his entire face. Then let's build a life together. Starting right now. He slipped the ring onto her finger, rose, and kissed her while their friends and family applauded. And standing there on the roof of the tower where it had all begun, Lena realized that this was what she'd been looking for all along. Not a job, not a salary, not even love in the traditional sense. A partnership with someone who challenged her to be extraordinary. A purpose that demanded everything she had and gave back meaning in return. A love that was built on respect and honesty, and the courage to keep choosing each other even when it was hard. They married 6 months later in a ceremony that brought together people from every world they navigated, business leaders and community organizers, reformed criminals and federal judges, family and found family. Eduardo Castello gave a toast about unlikely partnerships and the possibility of redemption. Marcus, who'd become one of Dominic's closest friends, and Lena's self-defense instructor, spoke about the courage it took to change trajectories midstream. And Lena's mother, healthy now thanks to medical care Dominic's insurance had provided, cried happy tears and told everyone who would listen about her brilliant daughter. The honeymoon was 2 weeks in New Zealand, as far from the empire as they could get, with strict instructions to Anna that she was only to contact them if something was literally on fire. They hiked mountains, kayaked fjords, and spent long evenings talking about the future they wanted to build. A future where Dominic's businesses were completely legitimate, where the foundation's work expanded to national scale, where they could raise children who understood both privilege and responsibility. "Do you ever regret it?" Dominic asked one night as they watched stars over Queenstown. "Taking that job? Getting pulled into my world?" Lena considered the question seriously, thinking about everything it had cost. The fear, the danger, the moral compromises, the person she'd had to become to survive and thrive in spaces most people never saw. "No," she said finally. "I don't regret it. You gave me a chance to be more than I ever could have been alone. You challenged me to grow in ways I didn't know I needed. And yes, it was terrifying and dangerous, and there were moments I thought I'd made the worst mistake of my life. But it led me here. To you. To us. To a partnership that makes me better than I'd be without it. Even knowing what you know now, the violence, the gray areas, the times I've had to make choices that haunt me, especially knowing that, because you're not trying to hide who you are from me. You're trying to become better while being honest about where you've been. That's rare, Dominic. That's worth fighting for." They returned from the honeymoon to find the Castello development fully completed and already changing the neighborhood. The Angelo Castello Community Center was hosting job fairs. The apartments were filling with families, and the retail spaces were bringing legitimate business to an area that had been neglected for decades. Eduardo sent a note congratulating them on the marriage and acknowledging that the partnership had exceeded his expectations. Even Elena, still serving her sentence but apparently engaging with prison education programs, sent a card. It said simply, "You were right to choose him. Be happy." 5 years after that first meeting in Dominic's office, Lena stood in front of a Senate committee investigating organized crime's influence on legitimate business. She testified not as Dominic's wife, but as an expert on the systems that allowed criminal enterprises to flourish and the policy changes that could actually make a difference. Her recommendations, based on years of seeing how power really worked, were taken seriously, incorporated into legislation that passed with bipartisan support. Dominic watched from the gallery, pride evident on his face. Afterward, reporters asked if he was concerned that his wife's testimony might hurt his businesses. "My wife is her own person with her own expertise and her own conscience," he told them calmly. "I'm not concerned about her testimony because our businesses can withstand any scrutiny. That's what happens when you build something legitimate." It wasn't entirely true. There were still gray areas, still moments when influence was deployed in ways that skirted ethical lines. But the trajectory was clear, and that mattered more than any single compromise. 10 years after Lena had first walked through the doors of Vale Tower, they stood together in the same office where it had all begun. The space was different now, warmer, more lived in, with photos of their 2 children playing in frames alongside the business awards. The empire Dominic had built was different too, largely legitimate, focused on development that actually created value, using influence to advocate for policy changes rather than to circumvent regulations. "Do you remember what I said when you first came back after Elena kidnapped you?" Dominic asked, his arm around her waist as they looked out at the city. "You said, 'Let's build an empire.' And you said we weren't building an empire. We were building a life." He turned her to face him. "You were right. This—" He gestured to the office, the city beyond, the files representing years of work. "This isn't an empire. It's a life we built together, complicated and messy and not perfect, but ours." Lena smiled, rising on her toes to kiss him. "Ours," she agreed. "Built on a foundation of you trying to make me change my clothes, and me refusing to compromise who I was for any amount of money." "Best business decision I never made," he said, pulling her closer. "Second best," she corrected. "The best was when you came for me in that warehouse and proved that some things matter more than calculations." "I'd do it again, every time." "I know. That's why I stayed." Outside, the city moved through its rhythms, people building lives, making choices, navigating the complicated spaces between right and wrong that defined real existence. And in the office where it had all started, 2 people who'd chosen each other despite every rational reason not to stood together, looking at the life they'd built and knowing that whatever came next, they'd face it as partners. Not because it was easy, not because it was safe, but because somewhere between a confrontation about dress codes and a rescue from criminals, they'd discovered that the best kind of power wasn't control over others. It was the courage to be vulnerable with someone who saw you completely and chose you anyway. And that, Lena thought as Dominic's arms tightened around her, was worth every risk they'd taken to get here. The line that started everything had led them exactly where they needed to be, together.